Chapter 601, Discovery. Karkaroff's mouth fell open in surprise, rendering him speechless for a moment. The mention of bicorn horn powder and African tree snakeskin caught Harry's attention. He blinked, easily recognizing these as ingredients for a potion. The name of the potion seemed familiar, as if he had heard it before. Turning his head slightly, he looked at Hermione with a puzzled expression. "Polyjuice potion," Hermione whispered, her face mirroring Harry's surprise. She understood what Harry was pondering and mouthed the answer. The two exchanged silent glances, each noting the astonishment in the other's eyes. Polyjuice potion was a possibility they hadn't considered. It was an ingenious way to conceal one's identity and not difficult to execute. By discreetly obtaining a hair from a senior Hogwarts student during dinner in the Great Hall, one could approach the Goblet of Fire and place Hermione's name into it. Could it be Karkaroff? If so, why choose Hermione? Lying on the ground, Harry and Hermione subconsciously slowed their breathing. "I understand," Karkaroff finally spoke, closing his mouth and glaring at Snape with anger. "You're here to test me, aren't you, Severus? Who sent you, Dumbledore or Atticus Blaine? You must have shared your suspicions with them, right? They're investigating this matter." "No, it doesn't matter, Severus. Have you completely aligned yourself with them now?" "Answer my question first." Snape remained unmoved, his cold gaze fixed on Igor, wand gripped tightly, his stance low and ready. "This has nothing to do with me, Severus. I and Durmstrang are victims too." Karkaroff gritted his teeth. "Do you need me to swear in the name of the Dark Lord?" Snape's eyebrows twitched, but his posture relaxed slightly. He understood the weight of such a statement from Igor Karkaroff. How amusing! Snape's hostile expression shifted to a lazy smirk. He pocketed his wand and sneered at Karkaroff. "You dare mention the Dark Lord? With all due respect, Igor, given your past actions, if the Dark Lord returns, your fate is sealed." Snape had no desire to sever ties with Karkaroff. After delivering his parting words, he turned to walk back to the castle. However, Karkaroff, startled by his own unintentional words, hurried after him. He grabbed Snape's arm, his voice filled with anger. "Go back and tell those two despicable men, Blaine and Dumbledore, that they aren't the only ones who can suspect me. I will investigate them too." "I'll handle it," Snape replied, pulling his arm free, a sarcastic smile playing on his lips. "Do you have any other instructions, Igor? If not, I suggest you return to your ship as soon as possible. This school is full of Dumbledore's spies." Harry and Hermione thought the secret conversation had ended. However, Professor Karkaroff, headmaster of Durmstrang, suddenly changed his demeanor. The anger and grievance vanished, replaced by a smooth, friendly expression, as if he hadn't been the one wronged moments ago. "Don't be in such a hurry, dear old friend," Karkaroff smiled, draping an arm around Snape's shoulders. Snape glanced at him with disdain, but didn't resist. "There is something you might help me with. I heard, Severus, that Atticus Blaine graduated from the academy you're responsible for. I understand you have always had a good relationship?" Snape merely looked at him sideways, remaining silent. "Look, when you tell Blaine that it wasn't me who put that silly girl's name into the Goblet of Fire, could you also ask him about the first event of the game? What should be done?" "You doubted me." "Doubted." To Karkaroff's hasty retreat, Snape remained composed, though his expression was taut with tension. He stood his ground, his eyes narrowing as he faced Moody's fierce gaze. "Moody, your accusations are baseless," Snape said, his voice steady but edged with irritation. "We were merely discussing matters of mutual concern. There's no conspiracy here." Moody's magical eyes swiveled, scrutinizing Snape with an intensity that seemed to pierce through any facade. "Discussing matters of mutual concern, is it? In the dead of night, away from prying eyes? You must think me a fool, Snape." Harry and Hermione, still hidden in the shadows, exchanged a glance. The tension in the air was palpable, and they could feel the weight of Moody's suspicion pressing down on the scene. "Enough of this," Snape said, his voice low and controlled. "If you have nothing more than baseless accusations, I suggest you let us be." Moody's lips curled into a sneer. "I'll be watching you, Snape. Both of you. Don't think for a moment that your past deeds are forgotten." With that, Moody turned and limped away, his presence leaving a lingering sense of unease. Snape watched him go, his expression unreadable, before he too turned and disappeared into the shadows. Harry and Hermione remained silent for a moment, processing what they had just witnessed. The encounter had been intense, revealing the deep-seated mistrust and animosity that lingered between these figures from the past. "Do you think Moody's right?" Hermione whispered, her voice barely audible. Harry shrugged, his mind racing with possibilities. "I don't know, but we should keep an eye on them. Something's definitely not right." With a shared nod of agreement, they quietly slipped away, their thoughts consumed by the night's revelations and the mysteries that lay ahead. The fact that Karkaroff managed to escape from Moody was surprising enough for Harry and Hermione, but what astonished them even more was that Professor Moody didn't pursue him, allowing him to flee. "Coward!" Moody spat with disdain, then turned his attention to Snape, whose face was gradually turning a shade of blue. "You seem much braver, Snape. Care to share something interesting?" "I have nothing to say," Snape replied, his breath coming in short gasps, clearly under the weight of Moody's intense scrutiny. He pressed his thin lips together tightly. "If you have any doubts about me, take them to Dumbledore." With that, Snape wrapped his black robe around himself like a bat folding its wings and swiftly maneuvered around Moody, heading towards the castle. He disappeared into the foyer, leaving no trace behind. In an instant, the lively chatter of the surroundings fell silent, replaced only by the biting wind that howled like a knife through the air. Harry watched Professor Moody, who stood more than 10 meters away, and observed Snape's retreat into the castle. A sense of admiration welled up within him. Moody had managed to intimidate both Karkaroff and Snape into retreat. Yet, a lingering question gnawed at him. Why had Professor Moody let them go so easily? Shouldn't he have interrogated them? Harry pondered this, and even Hermione sensed something was amiss. Given Professor Moody's previous assertiveness, it seemed unlikely he would simply let them leave. Just then, Professor Moody's sudden voice broke the silence, startling Harry and Hermione. "Oh, the weather is truly cold, and it's not pleasant to lie down in the mud. Mr. Potter, Miss Granger, why don't you stand up and talk?" End of this chapter. Chapter 602, Moody's Fear. Harry initially thought he had misheard. After Professor Moody revealed the truth, Harry remained motionless, lying on the ground with disbelief etched on his face. Hermione was equally, if not more, terrified. She feared that Professor Moody might not be as forgiving as Professor Blaine, especially if he was angry. As Professor Moody approached them, slowly on crutches, stopping directly in front of them, Harry realized there was no room for hope. "Professor Moody." Harry and Hermione quickly stood up, shedding the protection of the invisibility cloak. Their robes were soaked with mud and water, and the cold wind chilled them to the bone. If they stayed like this, they might end up spending the night in the hospital wing with Madame Pomfrey. Fortunately, Professor Moody raised his wand and pointed it at them. A wave of warmth surged through their limbs, and their damp robes dried instantly. "Thank you," Hermione said, her tense shoulders relaxing as she felt the warmth. Professor Moody's friendly gesture eased her nerves. "The invisibility cloak is quite something, Potter," Moody rasped with a hoarse laugh. "I bet you've done a lot of great things with it." Professor Moody seemed intrigued by the cloak, his magical eye fixated on it. If possible, Harry would have lent it to him for a few days, especially if it could help investigate Hermione's warrior identity. But he needed it tonight to keep himself and Hermione hidden. "Well, it was my father's," Harry hesitated, unsure why he felt compelled to mention this. He wasn't worried about Moody confiscating it. Very interesting, Moody murmured, still focused on the cloak. "This isn't an ordinary invisibility cloak. I can sense the unique aura it conceals. I'm always sensitive to such things. I spotted you two through my magical eye." Harry stared at Moody's blue eye in awe. Until now, only Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine had been able to see through the cloak's protection. Tonight, he met a third. Realizing he might have said too much, Moody grinned at Hermione and Harry. "Come on, you two brave little ones. We don't need to stand here in the cold wind, do we?" "Brave?" Hermione and Harry exchanged glances, surprised by Moody's assessment of their nighttime escapades and eavesdropping. Ignoring their confusion, Moody waved them along, leading them up the marble stairs. Once inside the foyer, he turned left into a deserted corridor. Though the wind still blew through the window holes, The torches on the walls burned brightly, providing some warmth, much more comfortable than standing outside. Professor Moody looked around cautiously, his magical eye spinning so rapidly that it made Hermione feel a bit queasy. "I can't make the same mistakes Snape and Karkaroff did, can I?" he said with a grin, noticing Hermione's unease. But his words only heightened the tension for Hermione and Harry, who had indeed been eavesdropping on the professor's conversation. "As I said," Moody began, "but the narrative leaves us hanging, the tension palpable in the air." Atticus Blaine let out another hoarse, dry laugh. "I must commend you two for your heroic and fearless behavior. Do you realize what you just faced? Dumbledore didn't want me to say this, but it was indeed a conspiracy between two extremely dangerous individuals. You've done well to protect yourselves. It seems not everyone has ignored what I've repeatedly emphasized in class." Harry was taken aback by Moody's unique perspective, but he appreciated Professor Moody's assessment of Snape, so he grinned shyly. Moody patted him on the shoulder and said in his gruff voice, "All right, enough chit-chat, you two. I assume you've experienced this conspiracy in full, right? Tell me everything you heard. Who will speak first? Miss Granger, I think you should start. Minerva has been praising your clever mind, and I'm sure you haven't missed a word, have you?" "What?" Hermione exclaimed in surprise. She hadn't expected Professor Moody to ask her so directly about what she had heard. How could Professor Moody know about the conversation between Professor Snape and Karkaroff? While the content of their discussion wasn't entirely strange, Hermione felt something was amiss. "Why do you think I let those two go, Miss Granger?" Moody said gruffly. "Snape and Karkaroff are both adept at sophistry and deception, but Dumbledore always prefers to see the good in people. Without concrete evidence, they could fabricate lies to conceal the truth." Understanding dawned in Harry's eyes, resolving his earlier confusion. If Professor Blaine had asked, Hermione would have spoken without hesitation, but with Professor Moody, it was different. Yes, he was a great defense against the dark arts professor, currently teaching them how to resist the Imperious Curse. Many young wizards admired him for his willingness to take risks in teaching, but they had no personal relationship with him. Hermione hesitated, then noticed Harry looking at her eagerly out of the corner of her eye. "Sirius thinks Moody can be trusted," Harry's eyes seemed to convey. "Actually," Hermione began, taking a deep breath and finally making up her mind. She said to Moody, "We didn't hear Professor Snape and the headmaster of Durmstrang plotting any conspiracy. In fact, Professor Snape mentioned, the storage room in his office." Hermione blushed slightly, recalling her own visit to Snape's storeroom. On the night Beauxbatons and Durmstrang arrived at Hogwarts, there was a theft, and the bicorn horn powder and African tree snake skin were stolen. Based on the speculation you and Professor Blaine discussed on Halloween night in the room behind the auditorium, Professor Snape suspected it was Professor Karkaroff. As Moody had suggested, Hermione remembered the conversation verbatim and quickly recounted the details until Karkaroff tried to persuade Snape to help him uncover information about the Triwizard Tournament's first task, to which Snape hadn't yet responded. After sharing this, Hermione and Harry watched Professor Moody intently, eager to know what the experienced Auror thought. To be honest, Hermione felt Snape hadn't revealed any flaws that night. Perhaps the biggest issue was his meeting with the Durmstrang headmaster, but Professor Moody didn't seem to think so. His expression was solemn, and his magical blue eye remained fixed in its socket, as if glued in place. "You're saying Snape suspected someone was brewing Polyjuice Potion and informed Dumbledore and Blaine about it?" Hermione nodded first, then quickly shook her head. Karkaroff questioned. Hermione hesitated, glancing at Professor Moody. For a fleeting moment, she thought he seemed a bit frightened, but she quickly dismissed the notion. After all, what could possibly scare Professor Moody? It must have been her imagination. Harry's eyes were filled with earnest curiosity. He hoped Professor Moody could shed some light on the factors contributing to Snape's recent misfortunes. Karkaroff suspects that Dumbledore or Atticus Blaine sent Snape to investigate him. What a ridiculous idea. If they truly believed Karkaroff was using Polyjuice Potion, they wouldn't need Snape to inquire, Moody mused. Did Snape inform Dumbledore and Blaine that someone was secretly brewing Polyjuice Potion in the castle? If so, why haven't they taken any action? Moody pondered, falling into a prolonged silence. His worried expression unsettled Harry and Hermione, prompting them to gently remind him of their presence. Startled, Professor Moody snapped back to attention. "Oh, I'm fine, Miss Granger and Mr. Potter, thank you," he said, regaining his composure. "The information you've provided is invaluable, truly invaluable. Now return to your dormitory. I'll keep a close watch on Snape and Karkaroff." End of this chapter. Chapter 603, Intervention. The dim common room was empty, with the smoldering pine wood in the fireplace offering its last bit of warmth. After returning, Harry and Hermione finally felt their tense spirits begin to relax. It had been a long day, filled with events that left them mentally exhausted, and neither had the energy to discuss it. After exchanging a quiet goodnight, Hermione hurried up the spiral staircase to the girls' dormitory, while Harry slowly made his way to his own. As Harry quietly opened the door, a sliver of candlelight escaped through the crack, casting a blurry, wedge-shaped shadow on the floor. He paused, staring at the light and shadow, feeling as though returning to his dormitory was an ordeal. But he couldn't stand there all night. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside with gentle steps. To his relief, Ron was already in bed. Harry wasn't sure how he would have faced Ron otherwise. There had never been a precedent for dormitory members to come to blows, yet he and Ron had been the first. The only one still awake was Seamus, who was reading a book on a soft pillow. It was certainly not a textbook, as Harry couldn't imagine any schoolbook that would make Seamus chuckle. Upon seeing Harry, Seamus looked a bit uncomfortable, but still greeted him with a nod before placing the book on the bedside table and burrowing under his quilt. Harry stood there, alone, with a dull expression. He wanted to quietly thank Seamus. If Seamus and Dean hadn't called Hagrid earlier, who knows how things might have ended. Ron lay facing the wall, his back to Harry, and it was unclear if he was asleep. During their earlier conflict, Harry couldn't remember where his fists had landed on Ron, but he felt a pang of regret. He hoped Ron's face wasn't hurt, so neither of them would feel too embarrassed. What would Ron say if he knew what had just happened? This thought crossed Harry's mind as he turned out the last light in the dormitory, going to bed without washing up. Exhaustion washed over him, and for Harry, this bad day was finally over. In the days that followed, nothing significant happened. Harry's fear of quarreling with Ron whenever they met didn't materialize. They simply didn't speak to each other. In class, they sat far apart, and in the dormitory, they pretended not to see each other. The atmosphere affected everyone else, and laughter had all but disappeared. Another matter weighed on Harry's mind. He had hoped that after Hermione informed Professor Moody about the conversation between Snape and Karkaroff, Snape would be questioned by Professor Dumbledore or Professor Blaine. He imagined they would accuse Snape of maintaining private contact with competitors or, to prevent him from leaking competition secrets to Karkaroff, lock him in the basement. Ideally, Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine would recognize Snape and Karkaroff as Death Eaters and notify the Dementors to take them to Azkaban. Unfortunately, Snape continued to appear in the Great Hall every day, shamelessly eating his meals, while Professor Blaine and Professor Dumbledore still chatted and laughed with him. In potions class, Harry sat staring at Snape as he wrote on the blackboard, imagining all sorts of misfortunes befalling him. With Ron out of reach for conversation, this seemed to be Harry's only outlet. Atticus Blaine found solace in his thoughts, hoping fervently that Professor Moody would burst through the door and declare, "The Ministry of Magic has authorized your arrest, Severus Snape. You'd better surrender and prepare for a lifetime in Azkaban." That would be the best outcome, he mused. "What are you laughing at, Harry?" Hermione nudged Harry's ankle with her foot. She was diligently taking notes, but her peripheral vision caught Harry's unusual expression, which worried her. From her perspective, Harry had no reason to be amused. "You've ruined my mood, Hermione," Harry replied plaintively, sighing. "Tell me, why is Snape still here?" "I've explained it many times, Harry," Hermione said quietly, her eyes never leaving her notes. "Snape is probably investigating Karkaroff under the orders of Professor Dumbledore or Professor Blaine. If that's the case, they can't blame Snape." "But they should at least keep an eye on him," Harry retorted, glaring at Hermione. Aren't they worried that Snape might become Durmstrang's spy? Hermione's face immediately tensed, confusing Harry. He couldn't fathom why his question would cause such a reaction, but in the next moment, he understood. Potter. Snape's voice cut through the air. Harry quickly turned his head to find Snape glaring at him coldly. His heart skipped a beat, sensing that Gryffindor's hourglass might soon lose a few gems. Yet, Harry underestimated Snape's vindictiveness. Under the eager eyes of the Slytherin students, Snape approached Harry's desk. He glanced at the bubbling potion in Harry's cauldron and smirked. "Tell me, Potter, what's in your pot?" "The antidote," Harry replied defiantly, meeting Snape's gaze without flinching. I followed the steps. In this lesson, Snape had instructed them on brewing poisons and their antidotes. Hermione had brewed the poison, and Harry was tasked with creating the antidote. Is that so? Snape's sarcastic smile widened. Instead of deducting points for Harry's insolence, he turned to the anxious Hermione and said casually, "Let's see, Granger. I want you to drink the poison you brewed. Let's find out if Harry Potter's antidote can save you." The Slytherin students erupted in laughter. Pansy Parkinson even stood on her stool, eager to witness the spectacle. Meanwhile, Ron, seated a row away, looked on with a mix of fear and anger, his eyes darting between Harry and Hermione. Hermione's face turned pale, and she trembled slightly with fear. For perhaps the first time, she resisted a direct order from a professor and did not reach for her poison. "You can't do this!" Harry shouted angrily. 10 points from Gryffindor, Potter," Snape said coldly, "for disrupting the class and not adhering to the standard teaching procedures. Now, Granger, drink your poison." At that moment, a knock on the door of the underground classroom interrupted Harry's plan to pour Hermione's poison into Snape's mouth. It was Colin Creevey, and the news he brought spared Hermione from the grim task. As Hermione and Colin exited the classroom, Harry exhaled in relief. But before he could savor the moment, Snape's sinister voice echoed again. "Unfortunately, Potter, now it's your turn to taste your masterpiece." "You've decided to do this, haven't you, Atticus?" In the Office of Student Safety, Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine stood by the window, observing the first-year wizards practicing their flying skills on the field below. The open windows allowed the cold wind to sweep into the room, heralding the imminent arrival of the year's first snowfall. Atticus Blaine stood by the window, his demeanor calm and composed. "And if I don't," he replied, his voice steady, "if I don't personally intervene in the game, I can't guarantee everyone's safety, can I? I must bring these children back." Dumbledore, standing nearby, had initially intended to suggest Severus for the task. However, he caught the icy glint in Atticus's eyes and wisely chose to hold his tongue. After a moment of contemplation, he spoke slowly. "You do realize this means you'll have to confront Tom directly. By then, he won't be the same as he was at the Quidditch World Cup." Atticus chuckled softly, stretching as if to signal the end of their conversation. "You should have more faith in me than anyone else, shouldn't you, Headmaster Dumbledore? Now, let's proceed. The ceremony below is about to commence." End of this chapter. Chapter 604, The Magic Wand. Oh, yes, that scene feels as if it happened just yesterday. You followed Severus Snape into my shop. "The moment I saw you, I knew I was welcoming a unique guest," said Garrick Ollivander, the renowned wandmaker, as he entered Atticus Blaine's office. Ollivander was a significant figure in the British wizarding community, and his presence was always noteworthy. "It's not difficult to tell that you are of Muggle origin. However, unlike other children raised in Muggle society, when you walked into my shop, your eyes revealed a cautiousness that surpassed mere curiosity. Fear, generally speaking, does not manifest in such situations. Few children can remain as calm as you did, so I immediately knew you had an extraordinary background," Ollivander continued, his voice filled with nostalgia. Atticus maintained a polite smile, listening quietly. Even Dumbledore, who was present, seemed intrigued by the conversation, patiently absorbing every word. "Ebony wood, 12 inches long, slightly rigid, with a dragon heartstring core, correct?" Ollivander inquired. "That's right," Atticus nodded slightly. "The price was 6 galleons and 10 silver sickles. You gave me a good discount, perhaps because of my charming appearance." Dumbledore's lips twitched in amusement, but he remained silent. Ollivander, seemingly lost in his memories, continued speaking. I remember we tried many wands before settling on yours, Mr. Blaine. It was a remarkable wand. I recall every wand I've ever sold. When I took over the shop, my craftsmanship was not as refined, and the materials for your wand were quite ordinary. A malnourished tree from a magic barren area and a domesticated dragon. Nothing seemed exceptional, yet the result was astonishing. Many ordinary elements combined to create a wand of immense power. Why do you think that happened? Atticus asked, his curiosity piqued. Wand-making was a niche and profound branch of alchemy, with knowledge closely guarded by the Ollivander family. Learning it independently was nearly impossible. Oh, Mr. Blaine, I can't say for certain, Ollivander replied slowly. No one can. If you insist on an answer, I can only suggest that perhaps the malnourished tree and the dragon, both with vibrant and yearning hearts, imbued their wishes into this wand. When the wand chose you, I knew the little boy before me was destined for greatness. Ollivander's silver eyes gleamed as he looked at Atticus with a hint of surprise. But your achievements have far exceeded my expectations, Mr. Blaine. I once thought you might become a famous dark wizard. Don't take offense, Mr. Blaine. A wand seeks a master who desires strength. Atticus chuckled, unfazed. It seems I received the right guidance. Not so, Mr. Blaine. Ollivander shook his head. It was your kind nature that overcame your thirst for power, earning the true allegiance of your wand. I suppose Atticus didn't expect you could see through him with a wand, Dumbledore remarked, smiling at Atticus, who was holding a teacup. He then turned to Ollivander, his expression becoming serious. In our meetings over the years, you've often mentioned your regrets. Perhaps there's no need to revisit them. Oh, why not? Atticus asked, intrigued. What's the story? Would you mind sharing it with me? Dumbledore looked resigned, as if he anticipated Ollivander's response. The secret could no longer be concealed. Oh, Albus has given up his original wand, Ollivander said with a touch of sadness. He no longer uses the wand he received from my father. I must say, Albus, my father spoke of it on his deathbed. Really? Atticus Blaine was slightly taken aback. How could that be? It's not something one would typically do. This isn't what I wanted either, Dumbledore replied calmly. But the wand was damaged due to my improper use many years ago, forcing me to make a new choice. It was after that duel that shocked the world, Ollivander interjected, causing the corners of Dumbledore's mouth to twitch slightly. Oh, I see, Atticus murmured, recalling the peculiar elder wand Dumbledore now wielded. Few wizards used such a wand, and Atticus had never given it much thought before. Ollivander's reminder and Dumbledore's reluctance to elaborate made him suspect there was more to the story. This wand is... Atticus stared thoughtfully at Dumbledore's sleeve, where the wand was usually kept. The warriors will soon arrive in the classroom downstairs, Atticus. We must hurry, Dumbledore said, his silver beard swaying slightly. He then turned to Ollivander, who was watching him with a look of regret. What I want to ask you about, Garrick, are the two wands made from fox's feathers. The Dark Lord and Potter, Ollivander responded, immediately intrigued by Dumbledore's unspoken question. His eyes sparkled with excitement. Two wands crafted from the tail feathers of a phoenix, owned by the most malevolent dark wizard in history and the one who defeated him. It seems to signify their intertwined destinies. Could you explain that more clearly? Atticus inquired, narrowing his eyes. He wasn't sure what Dumbledore had previously discussed with Ollivander. If the cores of two wands come from the same source, what happens when they meet? The wand chooses the wizard, not the other way around, Mr. Blaine. I tell people that all the time, but few grasp its true meaning, Ollivander said with a peculiar smile. Wands have a life of their own, Mr. Blaine. They possess their own thoughts. Thus, they don't always obey the wizard's commands. Once a wand chooses its master, it becomes part of that wizard. Atticus's mind raced as he grasped the significance of Ollivander's words. If two wizards with such wands were to meet, they wouldn't fight each other. However, if their owners insisted, a rare phenomenon would occur, where one wand would force the other to reproduce the spells it has cast in chronological order, Dumbledore explained quickly, indicating he had already consulted Ollivander on this matter. What if I change my wand? Atticus asked softly, his eyes deep with thought. Oh, Mr. Blaine, Ollivander chuckled. I've already mentioned that when a wand chooses its owner, it becomes part of that wizard. Changing wands won't solve the problem. Unless the wand and wizard come to despise each other and decide not to remain loyal, their connection cannot be severed. End of this chapter. Chapter 605, The Heat. Atticus Blaine lowered his eyes, contemplating Ollivander's words in silence. He could grasp the essence of what Ollivander was trying to convey. Upon reflection, it seemed that Harry was indeed a formidable opponent, divinely chosen for Voldemort. Their souls were intricately linked, sharing the same core of Fawkes's feathers in their wands. If Voldemort were to use Harry's blood for his resurrection, it would forge yet another profound connection. These three bonds represented three layers of formidable protection. Even if Atticus were to become Voldemort, breaking through such defenses would be a daunting task. Atticus glanced at Dumbledore, whose expression remained neutral, and couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration. What appeared to be a perilous situation was, in fact, already under control. While Voldemort lurked in the shadows, biding his time for resurrection, Dumbledore had already discerned the path to his demise. Perhaps Dumbledore was the key factor in ensuring Voldemort's ultimate downfall. The only remaining obstacle was Voldemort's Horcruxes. In theory, unforeseen events could always occur, right? Just like this time, when he and Dumbledore seemed to have the upper hand, yet an unexpected twist emerged. His presence had caused the world's original destiny to diverge. Although he had managed most crises adeptly, hidden dangers still lurked in the shadows, and Atticus was acutely aware of this. It was almost certain that one day these accumulated crises would erupt, and when that happened, the situation might spiral out of control. Dumbledore did not participate in the wand testing process that was about to commence. In fact, he had delegated most responsibilities. Minerva was entrusted with overseeing the internal affairs of the school, while Atticus represented Hogwarts in dealings with foreign entities. "Let's go, Mr. Ollivander. Let's meet the warriors who are about to face the challenge," Atticus said. The wand testing for the warriors was arranged in a spacious classroom on the second floor. This event was not only a test of wands, but also the first public introduction of the warriors from the three schools. Previously, Atticus had received numerous requests for interviews with the warriors, but he consistently declined them. He wanted to shield the warriors from external pressures that could disrupt their focus. However, as the competition drew nearer, the sense of urgency heightened. The second-floor corridor buzzed with the sound of excited chatter, reminiscent of thousands of bees flapping their wings. As Atticus descended the stairs, he noticed Filch, who had been tasked with maintaining order, being pushed out of the classroom door. Filch struggled to re-enter, his cries of despair echoing through the hallway. "Oh, what an amazing scene," Ollivander remarked, following Atticus. He seemed unfazed, smiling as he added, "I haven't witnessed such liveliness in years." "Let me handle it," Atticus said, approaching Filch and patting him on the shoulder. He drew his wand, stood in the corridor, and pointed it at the classroom. With a complex incantation, the space became hazy. For a moment, the reporters inside felt disoriented. When they regained their senses, they were astonished to find the classroom had expanded to the size of the Great Hall. "Oh, I should have done this ages ago," exclaimed a photographer who had lost a shoe. Then the crowd noticed a man with a distinctive presence appearing at the classroom door. The noisy throng fell silent, their attention riveted on him. At that moment, the noise seemed to swell, as if amplified by magic, becoming even more deafening. "You promised me an exclusive interview, Blaine," shouted Rita Skeeter, her voice piercing through the cacophony. She stood on tiptoes, her voice rising above the crowd of her peers. Her peculiar, stiff, wavy hair was now a tangled mess, and her jewel-like eyes bore smudges of fingerprints for some inexplicable reason. "The Daily Prophet is the only one here, isn't it?" Atticus Blaine's voice cut through the clamor, reaching Rita's ears with precision despite the chaos. In front of him, dozens of flashbulbs went off simultaneously, and a multitude of voices clamored for his attention. "The Tri-Wizard Tournament has suddenly announced that Hogwarts, as the host school, can have 2 champions. Is this a privilege you've used your authority to secure for Hogwarts, Mr. Blaine?" A wizard with a Hispanic complexion, dressed as a cowboy, shouted loudly. "Tell me what you think of the 4 champions, Mr. Blaine." a goblin exclaimed, leaping onto a stack of tables and waving its arms frantically toward Atticus. "Who do you think is most likely to win?" WWN announced it will use special means to broadcast the True Wizard Tournament events simultaneously in multiple countries. The Goblins have rented several Muggle stadiums and sold tickets. Preliminary investigations suggest the sums involved are enormous, and they all have the event organizers' approval. I would like to ask if you have any involvement in this matter, Mr. Blaine, and whether there is any transfer of benefits involved. The classroom was filled with over 100 journalists, each firing off questions, many of which were sharp and probing. Yet Atticus seemed unfazed, maintaining a smile as he led Olivin Day toward Madame Maxime. As he moved forward, the excited reporters parted like butter under a hot knife, none daring to obstruct his path. Finally, Atticus reached the group of champions, who appeared overwhelmed by the media frenzy. Victor and Fleur, accustomed to public attention, seemed at a loss, unsure how to handle the enthusiastic interviewers. Fortunately, Madame Maxime and Professor Karkaroff were present, providing some reassurance. Cedric and Hermione, however, were visibly intimidated by the reporters, who resembled a pack of wolves surrounding two defenseless rabbits. "You arrived just in time, Blaine," Madame Maxime said, her tone tinged with irritation. "We are fortunate to witness the excellent organizational skills of Hogwarts, Blaine," Karkaroff added angrily, his silver robe missing a large patch of fabric from his arm, though it was unclear who had removed it. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Atticus chuckled. "Someone did suggest that this meeting be scheduled on a rest day so professors could help maintain order. However, I considered that such an arrangement might cause even greater chaos. You know how curious the young wizards in this school can be." Atticus glanced at Cedric and Hermione, offering them a reassuring smile, which finally eased the tension in their shoulders. "What charter do we have, Blaine?" Ludo Bagman appeared from nowhere, panting and looking disoriented, as if he had just been bombarded by reporters. Atticus scanned the room, noting the absence of Barty Crouch, which was not unexpected. "Before introducing our 4 champions to you, we must follow the traditional process and conduct a test on the champions' wands. This is crucial, as their wands are their most reliable partners in the upcoming challenges." Game. Hermione noticed that Professor Atticus Blaine hadn't done anything particularly extraordinary, yet the moment he spoke, the room transformed from chaos into order. It was as if she had been magically transported to the classroom, carried in by invisible hands. The wand testing ceremony was a traditional affair, yet it still captivated the reporters present. They watched with keen interest as Mr. Ollivander inspected the wands of several warriors. Meanwhile, the owner of the Card Wizard clothing store, Feng Ya, was busy measuring the warriors' sizes in a small room that Atticus Blaine had conjured out of thin air, preparing their attire for the upcoming competition. Fleur cast a sorrowful glance at him, but refrained from voicing her concerns in front of everyone. The entire process took about half an hour. Finally, Atticus invited the warriors, along with Karkaroff and Madame Maxime, to sit at a reserved row of tables and chairs. "Now, we are ready to address some pressing questions from the Arting world, but please be mindful of the time," Atticus announced with a smile. "Mr. Blaine?" As if time had resumed, the enlarged classroom erupted into noise. The reporters' eagerness was palpable, creating a suffocating atmosphere that even the principals of the other 2 schools felt, let alone the young, inexperienced warriors. Amidst the clamor, Atticus singled out Rita Skeeter, given their complicated acquaintance. Rumor has it that one of the 2 Hogwarts warriors was selected through non-compliant methods. Rita's sharp gaze fell on Hermione Granger, her question causing Hermione's face to pale and her body to stiffen as if under a petrification spell. To cover up the scandal, did the tournament team alter the rules to allow Hogwarts 2 warriors? Is this the truth? "This is pure fabrication by conspiracy theorists," Atticus replied, his gentle smile unwavering. Before this Tri-Wizard tournament, there was no age restriction for warrior selection. To mitigate the competition's risks, we implemented a special regulation. Wizards under 17 were not eligible to apply. When we announced this rule at the start of the school year, it sparked discontent among many underage wizards who felt their rights were being denied. In response, we conducted an experiment. Hogwarts selected some exceptional underage wizards and submitted their names to the Goblet of Fire. Miss Hermione Granger is the foremost among them, representing all three schools. Hermione struggled to maintain a calm demeanor, concealing her fear. She couldn't fathom how Professor Blaine could fabricate such a significant story in front of so many reporters. If Atticus knew her thoughts, he might have smiled and said, "You are too naive. The truth often circulates within a small circle. Even if all Hogwarts students sense something amiss, it remains a minority. For the vast European wizarding community, they merely seek entertainment and hope for as many warriors as possible in the Triwizard Tournament. A plausible explanation suffices for them." End of chapter. Chapter 606, The Manic Fire Dragon. As the game day approaches, Atticus Blaine finds himself increasingly busy. To maintain order on this significant day, Hogwarts has released a limited number of on-site spectator seats. The event promises to be a historic occasion, marking the opening battle of the first Triwizard Tournament, and countless celebrities and influential figures from the European wizarding community are eager to witness it firsthand. Letters requesting admission to the event are arriving at Hogwarts like a flurry of snowflakes. Not only Atticus and Dumbledore, but also the faculty and staff have been inundated with requests from relatives and friends. Many of these letters tactfully express a desire to be present at Hogwarts on game day. Even Professor Snape has asked for a spot for one of his potion-savvy friends. This presents a significant challenge for Atticus, as he cannot accommodate everyone. He must make difficult choices, and for those who are not granted access, he diligently sends letters of apology. Despite his reluctance to handle such matters, Atticus understands that he now represents Hogwarts and must navigate the complex web of social obligations. In addition to these responsibilities, the live broadcast of the event has consumed much of his energy. A cooperation agreement has been reached with the Goblins and WWN, and preparations for venue rental are in full swing. They have provided several devices used to transmit broadcast signals, but converting the picture into a magical magnetic field signal and restoring it is a task only Atticus can manage. This core technology is something he cannot delegate, so he must handle it personally. Boom! A colorful scroll of fire appeared in the student safety office, where parts were scattered across the floor. Atticus and Fawkes, looking slightly tired, emerged from the dissipating firelight. Earlier that morning, Atticus had left Hogwarts to visit St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries to discuss cooperation. On game day, St. Mungo's would send a team of elite healers to Hogwarts. Although Atticus and Dumbledore's presence should prevent any major incidents, Madame Pomfrey alone might not be able to handle a mass injury situation. "Go," Atticus said to Fawkes, who was hovering in midair. After Fawkes returned to his true owner, Atticus gazed at the disorganized parts with a hint of melancholy and sighed. Half of November had passed, and Hogwarts was now shrouded in gloomy clouds, obscuring the moonlit night sky. Tonight was no different. The sky outside the window was filled with dark clouds, blocking the moon's light and casting only an irregular glow high above. Whoosh! Suddenly, a flickering silver light penetrated the wall and stopped in front of Atticus. The silver phoenix spread its wings, shedding a dreamy brilliance, and its blue eyes revealed a hint of a smile. "How's your day going, Atticus?" it inquired. "Stop beating around the bush, Principal Dumbledore," Atticus replied, his face darkening. "What's the matter?" "Just half an hour ago, the tournament team sent the Warriors' opponents to Hogwarts. They are currently stationed in the Forbidden Forest. Considering that these special guests may not appreciate the forest's environment, I thought it necessary for you to take a look." "Why don't you go?" Atticus asked bluntly. "Ah," the Phoenix winked playfully. "I don't think you'd want a centenarian to venture into the dark forest at night, enduring the cold wind and dew, and facing a group of fire dragons, right, Atticus? Besides, Charlie Weasley is accompanying these guests at Hogwarts. I thought you might want to." Atticus Blaine ignored the roaring laughter from the Phoenix Guardian and walked out of the office. It was now 8 o'clock in the evening. The castle was sparsely populated with young wizards, yet almost every one of them he encountered wore expressions of anticipation and eagerness. The very air in the castle seemed charged with excitement, as if it were ablaze with energy. These young wizards, all eagerly looking forward to the upcoming Wednesday, a day promising excitement. They were unaware that Professor Blaine, who passed by them, had been tirelessly working, neglecting sleep and meals, in preparation for this event for many days. The location for the Fire Dragon station had already been selected, so Atticus needed no guidance. He was curious, however, as to why the team escorting the Fire Dragon had arrived a day earlier than scheduled. With this question in mind, Atticus moved swiftly along the lakeshore. About 10 minutes later, he turned from a path into the forbidden forest. Once there, it wasn't particularly difficult to find his way, as the dark depths of the forest occasionally erupted with bursts of blazing fire and roars of rage. Atticus navigated around a bush and soon came upon a paddock surrounded by thick wooden boards. He was quite familiar with this paddock, having contributed some of the magic used for its confinement. However, the guests from afar had not yet settled into their new home. 4 carriages stood at the edge of the paddock, each larger than the Beauxbatons' carriage. The wooden panels on all sides of the carriages had been removed, revealing the iron cages inside, each containing a fire dragon. "I've had enough." Someone suddenly shouted from among a group of people standing at least 50 feet away from the 4 cages. "Get into the paddock quickly, for Merlin's sake." The man raised his wand, seemingly intending to cast a spell on the fire dragon, but a short and stocky figure stopped him. "Don't do that, Lovick," the figure cautioned. "It will only anger them. They've endured a long journey, and it's natural for them to be wary of new surroundings." "But we can't spend all night here." "Charlie," Lovick retorted, "we've traveled across mountains and rivers for more than half a month to bring them here. Now I desperately want a glass of whiskey and a soft bed to sleep in." The 4 fire dragons remained in their cages, each with an arm-thick iron chain around its neck. They weren't causing much commotion, merely watching their surroundings warily. However, any attempt by a dragon trainer to approach the cages was met with hissing and bursts of fire from the dragons. Atticus thought excitedly about the value of these creatures as he stepped out of the shadows. "Are you in trouble, Charlie?" he asked. Charlie, weary from the half-month journey, had never before escorted a fire dragon over such a long distance. Despite his reluctance to use magic to calm the dragons, he was seriously considering Love's suggestion. Just as Charlie was about to call his companions to cast a spell on the fire dragons, he was startled by the sudden voice behind him, and his face lit up with surprise. "It's you, Atticus!" he exclaimed. At that moment, an unexpected change occurred. The fire dragons, which had been merely guarding against the approach of the dragon tamers, suddenly became still upon seeing Atticus Blaine approach. 4 pairs of fierce, vertical pupils fixated on him, their demeanor shifting dramatically. Atticus Blaine erupted with a monstrous rage, his roar echoing like thunder. For 2 weeks, the fire dragons had relentlessly attempted to escape their iron cage. Despite knowing their efforts were futile, the presence of the gray-haired, purple-eyed wizard stirred them into a frenzy. As Atticus approached, the dragons lifted their necks and roared in unison, their cries reverberating through the air. They thrashed against the cage with desperation, their bloody mouths agape, revealing rows of sharp fangs. In the next instant, flames as intense as the sun filled the vision of every dragon tamer present. End of this chapter. Chapter 607, Intense Suppression. The fiery tornado dominated the vision of every dragon trainer present. Flames surged like an avalanche, turning the air red and distorting it with intense heat. In an instant, it resembled a roaring river of magma erupting from the earth. Beneath the fire dragon's shrill, piercing wails were the terrified cries of the dragon trainers. The dragon's breath extended 40 feet, but the searing heat transformed nearly 100 feet into a barren wasteland. Trees within this range didn't even ignite. They simply disintegrated into wisps of black smoke, carried away by the scorching wind. As the dead leaves were stripped away, the once moist black soil quickly turned a parched brown. "Charlie, what's happening?" As soon as the fire dragon exhibited any unusual behavior, the dragon trainers swiftly retreated, their instincts on high alert. Charlie, too, instinctively grabbed Atticus Blaine's arm, pulling him away from the inferno. Staring at the hellish scene before him, a dragon tamer named Loveck muttered in despair. Merlin's beard. I've dealt with fire dragons my entire life, but I've never witnessed anything like this. Charlie, eyes wide with shock, continued to grip Atticus's arm tightly with his rough hands. He didn't immediately respond to Loveck's question, his mind racing with thoughts. Suddenly, he turned to Atticus, his expression hardened. You've killed wild fire dragons before, haven't you, Atticus? Charlie's broad, usually kind face was now marked with anger. Amidst the roaring, whistling firestorm, he lowered his voice, glaring at Atticus. The dragon's breath scorched the earth, turning some stones red-hot. Those unable to withstand the heat exploded, their fragments tracing graceful arcs through the air, like meteors leaving a dazzling trail in the atmosphere. The dragon's breath seemed capable of burning mountains and boiling seas, yet Atticus remained unmoved. Still held by Charlie, he observed the fire dragon's strange behavior with interest. Initially, he thought their agitation was due to a perceived threat, but Charlie's words surprised him. Why do you say that, Charlie? Atticus asked, blinking. Wildfire dragons and domesticated ones are entirely different, Charlie explained. Atticus, they're much more sensitive than you realize. They can sense if you've harmed a wild fire dragon. Is that so? Atticus continued to blink. Could it be that traveling long distances has disoriented them, causing them to lose their spiritual senses and make mistakes? Absolutely not. Charlie's face, illuminated by the monstrous flames, remained stern as he stared at Atticus. Their spiritual sense is far superior to that of wizards. Normally, they wouldn't be so hysterical. They'd just become more vigilant, maybe even flee. But now they're trapped in a cage. Plus, these are female dragons with eggs. They think someone is threatening their young. Coughing slightly, Atticus attempted to defend himself. Oh, I just remembered, he said, feigning annoyance. A few years ago, while traveling the world, I was attacked by a wild fire dragon. My magical skills weren't as refined then. To save my life, I had to fight back with everything I had. But let's not dwell on that. Do you need my help to resolve this? Oh, please don't, Charlie replied, eyeing Atticus with suspicion, unsure if his story was true. Just leave here quickly, and that should be enough. It won't take long for them to return to peace. Atticus Blaine exclaimed, trying to calm the chaos. Charlie was about to send Atticus away, who had inadvertently excited the fire dragon, when suddenly a sharp sound pierced through the roaring sea of flames. Though subtle amidst the rumbling, it struck fear into everyone present, including Charlie and the dragon tamers. It's over, Charlie, Loveck shouted in despair. The fire dragon has burned through the cage. I suspect it's the Hungarian horntail. It's the only one capable of such destruction. What should we do? It might fly to the castle and attack the young wizards. Absolutely impossible. Charlie's face darkened further. He slowly turned to Atticus Blaine, his eyes twitching at the corners. Please, Atticus, be gentle. Don't harm them. They're just trying to protect their dragon eggs, so don't go all out. Of course, Atticus replied with a wry smile. If I take down the fire dragon, I won't have to fight the warriors myself. As he finished speaking, a flash of purple flickered in Atticus's eyes, and his wand appeared in his hand. The dragon trainers, realizing Atticus was about to act, watched in awe, Charlie included. They remembered the night of the Quidditch final, when Atticus had demonstrated his prowess. With a swift wave of his wand, a gentle breeze swept through the air. It was as if an invisible eraser had appeared, wiping away the anxious atmosphere. From the farthest reach of the dragon's fiery breath, the raging flames vanished like graffiti erased from parchment, disappearing in seconds. The dragon's breath, which had painted the night sky red, was gone, leaving 4 dragons perched on the frame, stretching their necks and howling in confusion, unable to produce any flames. The Hungarian horntail, covered in sharp bronze spikes, was the first to regain its senses. The heat had shattered its iron cage. Its wings, suddenly unfurled, spanned about 30 feet. With a heart-wrenching screech of twisting metal, the horntail clutched its dragon egg in its claws and took flight. If the Hungarian horntail escaped, the situation would spiral out of control. The dragon tamers quickly drew their wands, casting spells at the retreating horntail. However, the distance of over 100 feet, combined with panic and the dragon's magically resistant skin, rendered their efforts futile. Just as despair began to set in, the ground beneath them trembled violently. With a rumbling sound, cracks appeared in the scorched earth, and the solid ground shifted like liquid, forming a colossal shape. In the blink of an eye, a giant, towering 60 or 70 feet into the sky, emerged. The dragon trainers gaped at the stone giant, its rough outline intimidating despite its crude appearance. No one doubted its immense power. The giant's movement stirred up gusts of wind as it bent down, extending its massive hands toward the fleeing Hungarian horntail. The fire dragon, a formidable creature in the eyes of the wizards, was caught by its neck and thrown to the ground like a mere chicken. Nearby, towering trees, untouched by the flames, uprooted themselves and swiftly surrounded the horntail. After a complex transformation, a new paddock formed. The stone giant, using the same method, continued to secure the remaining dragons. 3 fire dragons entered, their fiery forms dissolving like snow under the sun, returning their essence to the earth. No flames, no flight, no armor to protect them. Charlie and the others watched with blank expressions as Atticus Blaine muttered softly, picking up the iron buckets crafted in the paddock. "I feel much better after moving around a bit," he remarked, stretching and smiling as the cool breeze brushed against him. Suddenly, a thought seemed to strike him, and he frowned, glancing toward the castle. "Oh, this distance probably won't attract any attention," he mused aloud. Then, turning to Charlie with a candid smile, he added, "It likely won't draw a large group of faculty and staff like it did back then." Charlie, observing Atticus as he relaxed his shoulders, clenched his fists, rendered completely speechless by the scene before him. End of this chapter. Chapter 608, Collective Cheating. 4 fierce adult fire dragons were unceremoniously tossed into a paddock enclosed by thick wooden boards by Atticus Blaine. These wildfire dragons were untamable, especially during the egg-laying period. Their maternal instincts nearly obliterated their sense of danger. Despite having just witnessed their own helplessness, they continued to cause chaos within the paddock. The presence of Atticus kept them restless, and the enclosure's restrictions prevented them from breathing fire or flying. Yet the Hungarian horntail persistently sought escape, repeatedly crashing into the enclosure. Each impact sent tremors through the ground, but the dim light on the boards repelled it every time. The smaller, yet razor-sharp Welsh green dragon attempted to scale the hoarding, but its claws failed to grip the boards. The Swedish short snout, displaying its cunning, tried to dig a tunnel to freedom. This prompted Atticus to cast another strengthening spell, rendering the ground unbreakable. The Chinese fireball, however, was the calmest. It shielded its egg beneath its belly, observing the futile efforts of its companions. Realizing the futility, it lay down, resigned, its fierce eyes fixed on Atticus, full of warning. Though the immediate danger was averted, the dragon trainers remained vigilant, striving to pacify the 3 unruly fire dragons. "I suggest you keep your distance from these fire dragons during the game, Atticus," Charlie said, wiping sweat from his brow, his voice breathless. He shot Atticus a disapproving look, the reason for which was clear. Charlie had turned down a career with a professional Quidditch team after graduation due to his love for fire dragons. The thought of harming a wild fire dragon was unthinkable to him. Otherwise, those warriors will be in big trouble. "Isn't that what makes it more challenging?" Atticus replied with a grin. Charlie shook his head. "I really don't understand your reasoning. If you just want the warriors to face the fire dragons, why bring in a nesting female to lay eggs? I dare not tell my mother what the warriors are supposed to do in the first round. She's not very pleased with you lately, and if I mention the fire dragons, her opinion of you might worsen." "You mean Mrs. Weasley?" Atticus asked, diverting his gaze from the fire dragons. Charlie's words puzzled him. "Did I do something to offend her? She doesn't think you and Dumbledore should have singled out Hermione for the competition, especially after reading Rita Skeeter's report in the Daily Prophet." Charlie mimicked his mother's tone. "Oh, how could they do this and let Hermione be the representative of the underage wizards? This isn't just about good grades. They should have at least chosen a boy." Atticus burst into laughter. They stood outside the paddock, chatting for a while. Charlie explained that to keep the fire dragons calm during transport, they were fed large doses of sleeping pills daily. However, they hadn't brought enough, forcing them to travel day and night, arriving at Hogwarts earlier than planned. Despite their best efforts, Charlie and his team of dragon trainers couldn't calm the fire dragons, leaving them to look at Atticus with a mix of hope and despair. They dared not ask the renowned Atticus Blaine to leave quickly. Fortunately, Atticus was perceptive enough to understand. Atticus Blaine knew he wasn't particularly favored by the fire dragons. These big guys can't escape. What do you think, Charlie? Want to head back to the castle with me? I can buy you a drink to wash away the dust, Atticus suggested with a smile. Charlie was tempted by Atticus's offer, but declined. Let's talk about it when we have a chance. We need to help the fire dragons adapt to their environment as soon as possible. Before the game starts, we'll be living in tents here. I've already written to Hagrid, and he'll be responsible for providing us with supplies. To be honest, Charlie said, glancing a few times at the dark forest before turning back to Atticus, I thought he'd be the first to show up. You know, Hagrid is very interested in fire dragons. He even asked me to take care of a poor homeless little guy before. Oh, Hagrid wouldn't miss this, Atticus replied with a smile, turning in one direction. In fact, he's been here for a while. The dense, lush bushes rustled, and a massive black shadow emerged from behind them. You've discovered me, Professor Blaine, Hagrid said with an innocent smile, stepping out from behind the bushes, followed by a house elf named Doom. Long time no see, Hagrid, Charlie said in surprise. Why were you hiding? And Charlie glanced at Atticus, frowning as he noticed the house elf trembling with fear of the fire dragons. Is this house elf from Hogwarts? Hagrid, according to the regulations, you shouldn't have brought it here. Information about the competition is top secret. It's just an elf, Charlie. No big deal. It wanted to come along and see me. I couldn't refuse. It's helped me a lot. After all, who wouldn't want to see a fire dragon? Hagrid dismissed Charlie's concerns, approaching the fence and gazing at the fire dragons in the paddock with fascination. They're so beautiful. Charlie, familiar with Hagrid's ways, shook his head helplessly. No one else is coming, right? Hagrid's massive frame shifted uneasily at the question. His eyes remained fixed on the fire dragons, but his tone was slightly unnatural. Of course not, Charlie. I was very cautious all the way. Atticus's mouth twitched. He knew there were two people hiding behind the bush where Hagrid had been. He was genuinely concerned about Madame Maxime, considering her height exceeded even Hagrid's. Hiding behind the bush must have been quite a challenge, and Hermione, cloaked in invisibility, wasn't much better off than Madame Maxime. From 30 feet away, Atticus could almost hear the young girl's heart pounding. His strong mental acuity told him Hermione was likely on the verge of collapse. Not to mention, a little further away, Igor Karkaroff had even climbed a tree to get a better view of the field. The heads of these two schools were going to great lengths for their respective champions, and Hagrid was certainly playing a significant role. I'm heading back, Charlie said, instructing Hagrid to prepare enough food for the fire dragons the next day, as they had spent most of their journey sleeping. Atticus realized his presence might complicate matters for many, so he bid farewell. Behind the bushes, Hermione, knowing Hagrid well, suspected he wouldn't be happy leaving those adorable fire dragons alone all night. She remembered Harry was still waiting for her in the common room. After taking one last longing look at the massive creatures in the paddock, Hermione quietly retreated, careful not to disturb the focused Madame Maxime. End of this chapter. Chapter 609, Coping Strategies. Since Halloween, after being chosen as the second champion of Hogwarts, the panic, uneasiness, and anxiety I had been feeling finally reached their peak the moment I laid eyes on the fire dragon. Hermione hid behind the bushes, staring at the restless behemoth. If Madame Maxime hadn't been just a few steps away, she might have screamed until she fainted. After Professor Blaine left, Hermione quickly followed suit. To avoid the awkwardness of bumping into Professor Blaine in the hall, she hurried along the path Hagrid had taken her. The endurance and agility she had honed in gym class allowed her to navigate the vines and potholes without hindrance. Time seemed to move in a peculiar way, as if in the blink of an eye, she was back at the castle. As she emerged from the forbidden forest and reached the edge of the school grounds, Hermione donned the invisibility cloak once more. It was then she noticed her robe was soaked with dew from her trek through the forest. The wind felt sharp and biting, as if countless knives were cutting through her, cold and painful. Drying her clothes was a simple task, something she had mastered by her second year, yet she chose to let them remain damp, enduring the discomfort. She wasn't sure why she did this. Perhaps the pain made her feel more alive. As she neared the castle, Hermione's mind became clearer. Unlike the hazy, dreamlike state she had been in after seeing the fire dragon and navigating the forest, her thoughts were now sharp and focused. Stepping onto the moving stairs from the side of the foyer, Hermione's thoughts drifted to Hagrid. After her close encounter with an adult fire dragon, she felt a newfound appreciation for Hagrid's ability to raise such a creature. It was incredible, and she was grateful to him for taking the risk to show her the dragon beforehand. Had she only learned on the day of the first task that she would face a 50-foot-tall fire dragon covered in scales and spikes, she might have fainted. Nonsense! Hermione's voice was tight as she gasped, addressing the fat lady, who was snoring in her portrait. "Now that you say so," the fat lady murmured, half asleep, and without opening her eyes, she swung open the portrait to let Hermione pass. Hermione climbed in, looked around, and then, at last! Harry jumped up from the sofa in front of the fire and waved at her. It was true that pain made one feel real. As she approached the small fire in the fireplace, Hermione realized just how cold she was. She touched her face, feeling as though she could no longer control her expression, and her long eyelashes were still dusted with frost. Harry quickly fetched a bundle of pine wood and stuffed it into the fireplace. This only dimmed the fire, so Harry took out his wand and conjured a flame. Once the fireplace was burning brightly, he turned to Hermione, who was already drying herself with her wand. "Tell me, Hermione, what did you see?" Harry asked nervously. Hagrid had taken the opportunity the previous day to tell them he would show them something extraordinary that night and advise them to wear an invisibility cloak. However, considering it was easier for one person to move around with the cloak, Harry had voluntarily given up the chance. Judging by Hermione's expression, he could guess that the first task would be far more daunting than Hagrid's blast-ended Scroot, which was merely disgusting. Atticus Blaine asked eagerly, prompting Hermione to recount what she had witnessed that night. She explained to Harry that Hagrid had not only taken her, but also Madame Maxime into the Forbidden Forest, far from the castle. There they encountered Professor Blaine and Charlie, and fire dragons. Hermione shivered slightly. Despite the warmth emanating from the fireplace, her fingertips remained pale and trembled slightly. There are 4 in total: the Welsh green dragon, the Swiss brachiosaurus, the Chinese fireball, and the Hungarian horntail. I overheard Charlie mention this when Hagrid inquired, she said. Harry was stunned, and a suffocating silence enveloped the room. Ever since Krum had hinted in the library that they could find inspiration from past Triwizard Tournament events, Harry and Hermione had scoured the library for information. Privately, they had engaged in numerous discussions about the potential dangers posed by magical and dark creatures. Hermione, in particular, had halted her rigorous study schedule to focus entirely on research. She distinctly remembered reading about fire dragons in at least 3 different books. After all, these creatures weren't particularly mysterious, and dragonskin protective gloves were common among young wizards. Harry and Hermione exchanged a glance on the sofa by the fireplace, the atmosphere heavy with tension. What are they expecting the champions to do? Harry's voice was tight, his mind buzzing with anxiety. He could easily imagine Hermione's current state of mind. Fight the fire dragons. Will the champions be torn to pieces, or will they tear the dragons apart? He attempted to lighten the mood with a joke, but it fell flat, given that Hermione was one of those facing the peril. Hagrid asked Charlie the same thing, Hermione said, her voice strained. She wasn't sure if it was the cold or the stress, but a severe headache clouded her usually sharp mind. Charlie doesn't know either. The Ministry of Magic might not reveal anything until the competition begins, but Charlie mentioned that all the dragons sent are females, nesting and hatching eggs. Harry's lips tightened, his face flushed with frustration. Was it even a guess anymore? Stealing the eggs from these nesting dragons seemed the most likely task for the champions. Harry had never witnessed a fire dragon hatching an egg, but he recalled an incident at the Dursleys when Dudley's friend Peel's dog had puppies. Dudley, ignoring all warnings, provoked the usually docile dog and ended up with a nasty bite, requiring several injections. With no option to retreat, they had to confront the challenge head-on. Time flew by, and within days, Hermione and Harry were tirelessly seeking strategies to handle the fire dragons. They stayed in the library until closing each night, returning to the common room with stacks of borrowed books, determined to find a way to protect Hermione from the dragons. Late on Wednesday, Harry tossed aside The Man Who Loved Fire Dragons, frustrated by its impractical advice on trimming dragon claws. "This is for people like Hagrid who want the dragons to be strong," he muttered, rubbing his eyes vigorously before picking up 100 Charms for dealing with crisis. Hermione sat on the sofa, flipping through the pages of a book with a soft swishing sound. "I've read that one, Harry, but it's useless," she said, glancing at the book Harry was holding. She muttered anxiously, "Yes, there's a conversion spell, but what's the use of converting, unless you can turn its fangs into something harmless like wine gums? The problem is, as the book states, not many things can penetrate the skin of a fire dragon. Transform it? You'd never succeed in transforming such a massive creature. I doubt even Professor McGonagall could. Of course, if you had the magical power of Professor Blaine or Professor Dumbledore. Oh, stop dreaming, Hermione. You can't do it." Tonight felt more exhausting than previous nights, not just due to accumulated fatigue. In tonight's physical education class, Professor Atticus Blaine had pushed them hard, as usual. Perhaps because they had shown progress, his methods had become increasingly ruthless. He was utterly relentless. Harry had been struck through the shoulder blade by a stone spear conjured by Professor Blaine. Yet, perhaps due to his growing tolerance for pain, he didn't faint. However, Professor Blaine immediately followed up with a stunning spell. Harry wondered if Professor Blaine's spear could penetrate a fire dragon's skin. Sitting on the ground, Harry gazed up at the chandelier hanging from the ceiling. A nonsensical thought crossed his mind, and then, what? He jumped up sudden, panting heavily, his green eyes alight with excitement. He stared at Hermione, who was taken aback by his sudden outburst. "Remember, Hermione, what Professor Blaine told me," Harry exclaimed, trying to contain his excitement. "What?" Hermione asked, still bewildered. "Fire dragon!" Harry grinned. "Professor Blaine taught us how to deal with a fire dragon. It was during PE class. I don't remember exactly what he said, but you must remember, right?" Hermione's eyes brightened, a mix of confusion and realization dawning on her. Meanwhile, on the other side of the boys' spiral staircase, a boy hiding behind the wall overheard the word fire dragon. His face, previously shadowed and gloomy, now showed a flicker of panic. End of this chapter. Chapter 610, Knowing Everything. Auxiliary spells cannot directly attack, but they can create obstacles for your opponent in a duel and help you escape trouble, often with unexpected effects. For instance, if you're facing a vicious fire dragon and can't defeat it outright, you can use the no-flying curse to prevent it from taking flight, the fire-extinguishing curse to silence its flames and then blind its eyes. This way, you'll be much more at ease, explained Professor Blaine. Hermione, much like Harry, leaped up with excitement, her body trembling slightly. As Harry had anticipated, Hermione had memorized every word Professor Blaine had uttered in class. Not bad at all. This is Professor Blaine's advice to all warriors. He has always said that warriors are most likely to emerge from students in physical education classes. Harry hadn't felt this exhilarated since Hermione had been chosen as a champion. The no-flying curse, the flame-extinguishing curse, blinding the fire dragon's eyes. How do you do all that, Hermione? Harry asked eagerly. There's a spell called the Eye Spell. Hermione's cheeks were flushed from the firelight, her eyes glistening with tears, like a prisoner who had been granted a last-minute reprieve. I know all these spells, she exclaimed, her eyes turning red with emotion. Professor Blaine is such a good person. I thought he would choose to sit back and watch, but I didn't expect this, Harry said with a happy smile. So, you just need to review more before the game starts to make sure you don't forget any spells, right? Hermione vaguely sensed there were still some issues, but at that moment she felt like a drowning person who had finally found a lifeline. She clung to it, unwilling to delve deeper into the potential problems. After the excitement, exhaustion set in. Their nerves had been on edge for days, unable to rest as they sought ways for Hermione to escape the fire dragon's fangs. Now they finally saw a glimmer of hope, and they were so tired they could barely keep their eyes open. The last bit of reason left in them ensured they put their scattered books into their school bags instead of kicking them into the fireplace. Then they each returned to their dormitories to rest. Harry went upstairs and stood in front of his dormitory door without entering. The room was already dark, and he could hear Neville's snoring from outside. During these days of physical education, Neville had been quite unhappy in their team. It seemed he had completely forgotten the skills he had honed while practicing with Dobby, becoming as clumsy as he was in other courses. It wasn't hard to guess the problem. Neville's talent in spells was lackluster, affecting his original strengths. But that wasn't what occupied Harry's thoughts. The dormitory door was ajar, and the wind from the corridor blew in, bringing a steady stream of chill. Had he forgotten to close the door, or was someone else not in their four-poster bed? Confused, Harry quietly entered. Everyone was in their beds, including the doormate who no longer spoke to him. Harry sighed, unsure why he felt disappointed. With mixed emotions, he went to bed without washing up. If Ron knew about the competition and that Hermione was competing with 3 other warriors to see who could survive longer against the fire dragon, what would he say? Was he still preoccupied with thoughts of fame? The next day was Thursday, and the morning began with herbology class alongside the Hufflepuffs. After half a month, the Hufflepuff students seemed to finally accept that it was certain Hermione would represent Hogwarts as a warrior. The shift in perception left them less enthusiastic. Students like Hannah, Finch-Fletchley, and Macmillan, who had once mocked in class but now participated in Professor Blaine's dueling course, unexpectedly found a sense of respect for Hermione. This change eased Hermione's psychological burden. However, she couldn't quite understand why. While squeezing pus from Professor Sprout's newly grown batch of balbotubers, she always felt Ron, who was a few people away, was watching her. After their conflict, Harry and Hermione took Hagrid's advice to heart, deciding to temporarily avoid each other's sensitive issues. Ron maintained a silent understanding with them, generally avoiding eye contact. Hermione paused her work and glanced at Ron, a faint hope in her eyes that he might initiate a conversation with Harry or herself. Yet, Ron, aware of Hermione's gaze, kept his head down, focusing on the large tuber with Siamus. Hiss! Hermione felt a pang of disappointment and didn't notice a drop of highly concentrated yellow-green pus slipping down her wrist from her protective gloves. The corrosive nature of the pus immediately made her face pale. "Did you hurt yourself, dear?" Professor Sprout asked, instantly alert. She hurried over to assess the situation, while Harry turned his head anxiously. "Sorry, Professor. I was careless," Hermione gasped. "I was careless." By now, the number of students who had experienced the harmful effects of balbotubers had reached double digits, yet Professor Sprout showed unusual concern for Hermione. Hermione speculated that this might be because Professor Sprout was aware of Hufflepuff's initial coldness towards her when she became a champion. Including herself, her attitude had been a bit chilly in the first few days. Perhaps feeling a bit apologetic, Professor Sprout offered to personally help with her injury. After class, as students trickled out, Harry stayed behind, waiting for Professor Sprout to apply a potion to Hermione's wrist. Just then, Ron, who had left, unexpectedly returned to the greenhouse. Cough. Perhaps the surprise in Harry and Hermione's eyes was too evident, making Ron a bit embarrassed. Nevertheless, he approached them, despite the pressure he felt. As he neared, he quickly glanced at Hermione's wrist, his lips moving slightly. "What?" Harry asked, surprised, as he hadn't caught what Ron said. "Krum." Ron took a deep breath and gestured towards the door. "Krum is outside. He wants to see you," he said, pointing at Hermione, his expression slightly awkward. "I asked him what he wanted, but he wouldn't say. He just wants to talk to you alone." Harry and Hermione exchanged glances, both surprised by Krum's request. "Well, that's it. Although Ron was also puzzled and uneasy about Crumb's visit to Hermione, it seemed his courage had waned after delivering the message. He slowly backed away, and once at a safe distance, he turned quickly and hurried out of the shed. "It's done," Professor Sprout announced at the right moment, discarding the cotton swab used on Hermione's wound into the trash. She didn't even inquire about the start of the game. The Durmstrang champion was seeking one of the Hogwarts champions for an important discussion. As Harry and Hermione exited the shed, they immediately spotted Crumb waiting outside. Atticus Blaine stood waiting alone. A group of students from Durmstrang lingered further away, anticipating Victor Crum's arrival. Today, they were supposed to be with Ravenclaw. Lau had joined Haig's classes. "Be careful, Hermione," Atticus cautioned. After encountering Snape and Karkaroff's spies, Harry had become wary of Crumb. In a hushed tone, he speculated, perhaps Karkaroff didn't glean any useful information from Snape, so he sent Crumb to you, hoping to get lucky. While this theory wasn't far-fetched, Hermione needed to assess the situation herself. Atticus expected their conversation to last a while, but after just 2 minutes, Crumb hurried back to his classmates, leaving Hermione with a peculiar expression on her face. "What happened?" Atticus asked anxiously as he approached her. "Was he trying to extract information about the competition from you? You didn't tell him anything, did you?" Hermione's face was a mix of confusion and contemplation. She met Atticus's gaze and remained silent for half a minute before finally speaking. "On the contrary, Atticus," she said, taking a deep breath and glancing at the Durmstrang students heading towards the auditorium. "He came to warn me that the first task involves a fire dragon, but how did he know? The only ones with Hagrid that night were me and the headmistress of Beauxbatons." "But why would he warn you?" Atticus pondered aloud after a moment of silence, his mouth agape. It was another question that demanded consideration. End of this chapter. Chapter 611, A New Opportunity. In the end, Harry and Hermione couldn't fathom why Crumb had revealed the first task of the Triwizard Tournament to Hermione. This wasn't just any trivial secret. It was crucial information that could give someone a significant advantage in the competition, potentially leading to victory. Even Hermione hadn't considered sharing the details about facing the fire-breathing dragon with the other 3 champions. Did Crumb confide in everyone, or was Hermione the sole recipient of this secret? And how did he come by such classified information? When they ventured into the Forbidden Forest that night, Hagrid had only taken her and Madame Maxime along. Professor Karkaroff hadn't accompanied them. Harry and Hermione pondered over this mystery for quite some time. The only plausible explanation they could conceive was that Snape, leveraging his connection with Professor Blaine, had helped Karkaroff uncover this secret. This theory only deepened Harry's disdain for Snape. During Friday morning's potions class, Harry couldn't help but glare at Snape with intense dislike, and Snape was undoubtedly aware of Harry's animosity. Within just an hour, Gryffindor's hourglass suffered a significant blow as Snape found every possible reason to deduct points from Harry. By the end of the class, Gryffindor had lost nearly 40 points. "I'm going to find Professor Moody," Harry declared, kicking over his stool as the class ended. He stormed out before Snape could dock any more points. When he encountered Hermione in the hallway, he vented his frustration. "I'll tell him that Durmstrang's champions have been spying on the competition. That way, he'll have solid evidence to expel Snape from the school." "Don't, Harry," Hermione urged nervously. "If Snape is expelled from Hogwarts because of this, Hagrid might face consequences too." Harry took a deep breath and hurried upstairs, his head bowed. The last class of the morning was Professor Blaine's physical education class. Originally, this class belonged to Snape, but Professor Blaine had taken it over. Since it was a time-coordinated course, students arrived at different times. By the time Harry and the others reached the classroom, only half of the students were present. The young wizards had become accustomed to this class. Before the session officially began, they tossed their school bags and robes into a corner and stretched their stiff bodies in the spacious classroom, preparing to be more agile during the exercises. Harry and Hermione quickly joined in. Meanwhile, Atticus Blaine was busy writing responses to those who had applied to watch the tournament. He needed to finalize the list of attendees that day. While many anticipated the champion's heroic performances, for someone like Atticus, who was involved in organizing the event, it was more than just a spectacle. It was akin to a grand banquet and a rare networking opportunity in the European magical community. After about 10 more minutes, the students finally gathered. Atticus sealed the letter in an envelope and handed it to a school owl perched by the window. Turning back, he noticed the students looking at him with a mix of curiosity and awe. "What's going on?" Atticus raised an eyebrow in surprise and asked Astoria, who was closest to him. "Are you in trouble, Professor?" The young girl hesitated before cautiously responding, "Because your expression seems very serious." "Oh." The students nodded in agreement, and Atticus chuckled. "Well, the school board rejected my request for a salary increase. I'm contemplating telling them to shove it and pay myself." Laughter erupted in the room, and even Harry, despite his simmering anger, couldn't help but crack a smile. Atticus moved from behind the table to the front, placing his Atticus Blaine perched on the edge of the table and began calling roll. Once he confirmed everyone was present, he addressed the class with a warm smile. "There's something important I need to share. Due to the upcoming Tri-Wizard tournament, next week's Physical Edu Cation class will be temporarily suspended and will resume the following week." The students weren't particularly surprised by this announcement. The first event of the tournament was scheduled for next Wednesday afternoon, and their physical education class was on Wednesday evening. It was only reasonable that Professor Blaine wouldn't expect them to engage in strenuous activities after such an eventful day. "In addition," Atticus continued, "for all students in the physical education class, except for Cedric Diggory and Hermione Granger, Wednesday morning classes are canceled. I've already informed your respective deans." He smiled as he noticed the surprise on the students' faces. "I have an extra task for you." "What is it?" Ernie Macmillan asked eagerly. "Here's the plan," Atticus said, clapping his hands to gather the students' attention. With faces full of excitement and curiosity before him, he explained, "I'm sure you're all aware of the terrorist attack at the Quidditch World Cup this summer. It was a devastating event, and many lives were lost. The Tri-Wizard tournament is also a high-profile event, and I've discussed with Headmaster Dumbledore the possibility of dark wizards attempting to disrupt it." Some of the more astute students had already guessed what Professor Blaine was about to propose. They watched him intently, eager for his next words. "Ordinarily, we would request support from the Ministry of Magic to send aurors for security. However, I see this as a unique opportunity," Atticus said, clearing his throat and dropping his pretense. "I need volunteers. Next Wednesday morning, I will be at Hogsmeade Station to welcome guests arriving on the Hogwarts Express. You will escort them in groups based on your dueling practice teams. Once everyone has arrived, you will be responsible for maintaining order throughout the event." The room fell silent, with students exchanging excited glances. Atticus could see their enthusiasm in their eyes. "What?" Atticus feigned a frown. "I thought this was a good idea. If you're not interested—" "We are!" Fred and George Weasley shouted in unison. The prospect of going on a mission was thrilling. "Do you really think—" Angelina Johnson, a lively Gryffindor girl, raised her hand, her voice trembling with excitement. "Do you really think we can handle a terrorist attack?" "Oh, absolutely," Atticus replied with a reassuring smile. "You're all making remarkable progress, and I can see it. Of course, I must tell you that I personally believe the likelihood of an actual attack is low. The biggest challenge you'll face is probably waking up early and braving the cold. But it's important to be prepared, isn't it? As part of Hogwarts, we have the chance to show the entire European wizarding community what we're made of and how much we value this tournament." This task seemed far more intriguing and meaningful than battling a dragon, Hermione thought, though her eyes betrayed a hint of sadness. "So, we'll need a bit of extra training," Atticus continued. "You can't appear amateurish. Standing around sloppily, laughing, and joking won't do. You need to be well-dressed, full of energy, and ready to make a great impression. In this class, and over the coming Saturday and Sunday, I'll be providing you with emergency training. Training, such as forming an escort queue and learning how to guard the surroundings, is essential. I trust no one has any objections. Atticus Blaine asked, his voice filled with enthusiasm. How could anyone disagree? It was such an intriguing opportunity. Even though they weren't warriors, perhaps this experience would allow them to make a mark in the Tri-Wizard tournament. Time is of the essence, so let's get started, Atticus continued, his eyes gleaming with excitement as he gestured toward the door. Cedric and Hermione stood nearby, looking somewhat out of place amidst the bustling crowd. Mr. Diggory and Miss Granger, Atticus addressed them with a nod. You are free to attend to your own matters. There's nothing here that concerns you. End of this chapter. Chapter 612, Embracing Noble Traditions. The first Hogwarts train will arrive at 6:30 next Wednesday morning. I need you to gather at the school gate by 7:30 and reach Hogsmeade Station before 8. The school has prepared 20 carriages to transport this group of guests. You will escort them. Upon arrival, half of the carriages will return to Hogsmeade Station, while the other half will guide the guests and help them settle in. I will provide you with the list in advance. With a decisive click, the door of the physical education classroom closed, leaving Hermione and Cedric outside. They lingered at the door, ears pressed against the wood, listening intently to Professor Blaine's instructions. It wasn't until 10 minutes later, when the sound of scattered footsteps echoed from within, that they pulled away, exchanging awkward glances. Ahem! Cedric cleared his throat, looking down at Hermione, who was a head shorter than him, with an uneasy expression. When he first became a champion, he was filled with excitement. However, as the tournament date approached, that excitement was replaced by anxiety and fear. To outsiders, being a champion was a title of honor, but only the champions knew how thin the line was between fame and becoming a laughingstock. Having adjusted his mindset, Cedric's initial irritation with Hermione faded, replaced by empathy. He understood that the pressure she faced was even greater than his own. At least no one questioned his status as a champion, nor was anyone secretly plotting to use his life for their own ends. I'm planning to head down for dinner. What about you? Cedric offered Hermione a friendly smile. It was clear to Hermione that Cedric wanted to talk, which surprised her. They had no prior friendship, and if not for the physical education class, they might never have spoken at school. Hermione was aware of Cedric's popularity among the girls, but his private life was not scandalous. His unwavering pursuit of Ravenclaw's Cho Chang was well known. I'm going to wait here. Actually, I'll come down too, Hermione began, then changed her mind mid-sentence. Together, they walked towards the stairs. With a mutual understanding, they strolled leisurely down the corridor. How do you feel? Cedric asked suddenly as they passed a corridor, halting his steps. Do you have any thoughts about next week's game? Oh, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to pry. Just as Cedric understood the pressure Hermione was under, she also foresaw the challenges he faced as a champion. They were about to be showcased to the entire European wizarding world, and any misstep could turn Hogwarts into a laughingstock. At that moment, Hermione recalled something important. She was bound to Cedric in the tournament. This was a decision made by Barty Crouch to appease Karkaroff's dissatisfaction. Though she hadn't forgotten, the constant stress of recent days had pushed it to the back of her mind. Hermione's silence seemed to confirm Cedric's misunderstanding. He sighed, a bitter expression crossing his handsome face. You're worried too, aren't you? Worried about not being able to overcome the challenge. My parents have been writing to me, telling all our relatives that I'm representing Hogwarts. They say they're proud, but this feeling is quite... If I don't know enough, they might suffer because of me. What does your family think about this? Hermione asked, sensing that Cedric's concerns extended beyond just his family's opinions. They were both under immense pressure from various directions. My parents are muggles, and they have no idea what the Triwizard Tournament is, Hermione admitted, feeling a pang of guilt. She hadn't written to her parents about it, and had no intention of doing so. If they found out their daughter was about to face a fire-breathing dragon, they might rush to Hogwarts to take her home. That's pretty intense, Cedric said, worry etched on his face. But then he caught sight of Cho Chang, and his thoughts shifted. He didn't want to embarrass his parents in front of the peers or himself in front of the girl he admired. Yet retreating wasn't an option. His role as a champion was a source of pride for many, and Hufflepuff saw him as a symbol of their house. Hermione observed Cedric's somber expression, noticing a flicker of doubt and hesitation in his eyes. "What do you think about the competition, Cedric?" she asked gently. "I'm not sure," Cedric replied, "but Professor Sprout suggested I look up past records." He suddenly brightened, looking at Hermione with a sheepish grin. "I suppose that's not considered cheating, right?" "Of course not," Hermione reassured him. "Have you spoken to the Durmstrang or Bosbeton's champions?" "You mean Krum and Delacour?" Cedric asked, surprised by her question. "No, I don't really know them," he said calmly. "But I know they're strong competitors. One of us has to perform exceptionally well, or Hogwarts would be embarrassed." Hermione was fairly certain that Krum wasn't inclined to share the competition's specifics with the Hogwarts champions. He was simply being honest. Hermione found herself more perplexed by this than Harry. Girls often have more nuanced emotions, and she sensed something in Krum's gaze during their library sessions. His eyes held an eagerness he couldn't hide, though Hermione was too embarrassed to share this with anyone. She was already under scrutiny as a champion, and if Krum's fans discovered his interest in her, dorm life could become unbearable. The atmosphere grew slightly awkward as Hermione pondered why Krum might willingly share valuable information with her. However, Cedric misinterpreted the situation entirely. He noticed Hermione's gaze and the blush on her cheeks, reminiscent of the girls who sent him love letters. But wasn't Hermione close to Harry Potter and Ron Weasley? Ahem. Okay, Cedric stammered, stepping back nervously. "I should head to the Great Hall for dinner. Let's talk later." With that, Cedric attempted to sidestep Hermione, eager to avoid any rumors linking him to her. The girl he admired wasn't Hermione. "Wait, Cedric," Hermione called out instinctively. She wasn't sure why she felt compelled to share this information with him. Perhaps it was a sense of fairness. Since Fleur, Krum, and she already knew, it seemed only right for Cedric to be informed as well, or so she convinced herself. Atticus Blaine didn't want to dwell on why Cedric seemed eager to distance himself from her at the moment. She scanned the area to ensure no young wizards were nearby, took a deep breath, and lowered her voice to speak quickly. "I'm only going to say this once." "What?" Cedric's voice quivered, already suspecting that his fears were about to be confirmed. "We're dealing with a fire dragon for the first event. That's all I can say. You need to come up with a plan quickly." Hermione hesitated for a moment, choosing not to offer a second piece of advice. Cedric stood frozen, still reeling from the shock of Hermione's revelation. However, Hermione didn't wait for him to recover. She turned on her heel and walked away, knowing that lingering would only arouse suspicion if others saw the two Hogwarts champions engaged in a secretive conversation. Just as Hermione had taken a couple of steps, the door of a nearby room creaked open. The deep, gravelly voice of Professor Moody sent a chill down both Hermione's and Cedric's spines. "Miss Granger," he called out. "Please, come to my office." End of this chapter. Chapter 613. Your method is unreliable. The expressionless Professor Moody startled both Hermione and Cedric as they realized they were chatting right outside his office door. It was common knowledge among the young wizards that, for a professor, walls were no barrier. He must have seen them conversing in the corridor and then eavesdropped for a while. "Professor, Cedric began, eager to explain, but Professor Moody cut him off. The scar on his cheek twisted as he spoke. "Mr. Diggory, aren't you going to have dinner? Go ahead, I have something to discuss with Miss Granger." Despite his reluctance, Cedric couldn't defy a professor's order. He glanced back repeatedly as he slowly disappeared around the corner of the stairs. Hermione, pale and anxious, feared the consequences. This was blatant cheating, and while losing her warrior status would be bearable, expulsion was a terrifying prospect. She also worried about Hagrid, knowing how much he dreaded breaking the rules. "Come on, Miss Granger," Professor Moody beckoned, turning back to his office. Hermione braced herself for a severe reprimand, expecting an interrogation akin to those conducted by aurors on dark wizards, yet nothing unfolded as she anticipated. "So, have you figured things out?" Professor Moody's tone was unexpectedly gentle, even slightly pleased, which baffled Hermione. "Aye," Hermione stammered, unsure whether to confess everything in hopes of leniency or to defend herself. Her lack of experience left her trembling from her fingertips to the ends of her hair, her mind conjuring images of her and Hagrid packing their bags, expelled from Hogwarts. "Oh, hey, it's okay, Miss Granger," Professor Moody said, perhaps noticing her nervousness. His tone softened, reminiscent of Atticus Blaine in casual conversation. "Don't you know? Cheating has always been a traditional part of the Triwizard Tournament." Professor Moody seemed unaware of the shock his words caused. He uncorked a wine bottle and took a few sips. Judging by his undisguised grimace, the bottle likely contained something unpleasant. Hermione sniffed the air, recognizing the familiar scent, but she had no time to ponder it. "Perhaps I should rephrase that," Professor Moody continued, smiling hoarsely at the bewildered Hermione. "The Triwizard Tournament is a large-scale, comprehensive competition. The contest isn't confined to the field. Miss Granger, intelligence gathering is a crucial test. It seems you've passed this test, and Mr. Diggory owes you." Hermione blinked repeatedly, and after more than 10 seconds, the icy grip on her breath melted, bringing color back to her cheeks. So that's it. Hermione realized that this perspective made much more sense. Ever since learning about the Triwizard Tournament's history, she had found it absurd. Expecting young wizards, still in school, to suddenly face werewolves, dementors, vampires, and fire dragons was preposterous. Professor Moody's explanation provided a reasonable context for this confusion. Hermione felt a twinge of annoyance at needing someone else to point it out, but as the thought crossed her mind, her nervousness began to dissipate. Heart directly, which is nearly impossible given its size and agility. The no-flying curse is clever, but fire dragons are naturally resistant to many spells, and the fire-extinguishing curse, while useful, won't stop a dragon's relentless pursuit. You need to think beyond conventional spells. Hermione listened intently, her mind racing with possibilities. She realized that while her plan was solid, it might not be enough. Professor Moody's words were a reminder that she needed to be more creative and strategic. "Thank you, Professor," Hermione said, her voice filled with determination. "I'll think about what you've said." Moody nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Remember, Miss Granger, it's not just about the spells you know, but how you use them, and sometimes the best strategy is one that your opponent doesn't expect." Hermione left the office with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew she had to refine her plan and consider every angle. As she walked through the corridors of Hogwarts, her mind was already working on new ideas, determined to face the challenge ahead with courage and ingenuity. "Remember, it's not just a piece of wood you're dealing with. You're very likely to hit its eyelids," Professor Moody explained, his voice gruff yet instructive. "The fire-extinguishing charm and the anti-flying curse are equally effective techniques. I believe they will work, but I'm not sure you fully grasp my point, Miss Granger. You're up against a wild fire dragon with formidable magical power. If your spell lacks strength, I'm afraid its impact will be limited and short-lived." Seeing Hermione's bewildered expression, Professor Moody allowed himself a proud smile. "Of course, I've mentioned that these are useful little spells, but they're not entirely safe. I suggest you bolster your defenses a bit. Perhaps with a tool that's easily accessible and doesn't draw too much attention." End of this chapter. How 614 Game Day. The morning was cloaked in mist, and the light was dim. Above the overcast sky, an owl, late from its nocturnal hunt, rode the wind. It circled the tallest astronomy tower at Hogwarts before flying warily to the owlery. However, as it passed behind Ravenclaw's tower, its keen eyes spotted something unusual, a towering circular structure that had seemingly appeared overnight, suspended above the abyss. Curiosity overcame its fatigue, and the owl made a sharp dive, covering several miles in mere moments. Riding the strong wind, the brown owl ascended swiftly and finally perched on a massive screen. This screen, suspended within a complex steel frame resembling a bird's nest, was black and composed of numerous square stone slabs. Each slab was intricately engraved with a magical corridor. The owl pecked at the screen with its hard beak, but this curious test was interpreted as an attack. A gentle wave of air materialized, blowing the owl back into the sky. It hovered above the building, hooting in displeasure, having lost a few feathers. Shifting its attention, the owl noticed other peculiar objects suspended in the air. These strange little things, with small white wings vibrating rapidly, were unlike anything it had seen before. It recalled seeing wizards holding similar objects to their eyes, which occasionally emitted bright flashes, though those lacked wings. The owl refrained from flying lower, as the air below was thick with dust, causing discomfort. Despite the haze, its vision remained sharp, allowing it to observe the wizards below. A large number of them were waving their wands, causing wooden planks to rise from the ground and fit themselves into the steel frame's load-bearing ports, forming a solid, ring-shaped platform. Suddenly, a sharp blast echoed, startling the owl, which quickly ascended higher. "Atticus, do you need the blanket?" A wizard appeared out of nowhere, carrying a large gray cloth bag. After scanning the area and finding no one, he pointed his wand at his throat and shouted, "Where are you?" "Thanks, Ludo. You've been a great help." A man emerged from a small hidden room behind the referee's bench at the top of the ring. Standing on a platform dozens of feet high, he easily spotted the caller. "What about your marvelous alchemy tool? Is there any chance it might malfunction?" Ludo, having apparated next to Atticus with the bag, glanced at the mysterious device in Atticus's hand and asked eagerly, "I don't know, Ludo, but I'm confident there won't be any issues. I plan to test it at 7. Ludo noticed he wasn't alone in the studio behind Atticus. 2 goblins were also busy inside. He immediately drew back his neck and lowered his voice. "I got it from the Ministry's warehouse. It was acquired when we were planning for the Quidditch finals. We didn't have to spend any extra money, so Barty agreed without hesitation." Atticus expressed his gratitude once more. He surveyed the area and sighed in relief as the arena finally began to take shape. Despite the lingering smoke and dust, which cast a gray pall over everything, Atticus approached the guardrail. With a flick of his wand, he drew a line from the sky to the ground. In an instant, a peculiar wave of ripples followed, and the smoke and dust vanished, fell back to the ground as if under immense gravity, even causing the owl in midair to falter. Atticus Blaine nodded with satisfaction at the clear view before him. With a flick of his wand, he pointed at the bag Ludo had brought. Suddenly, bundles of black carpets sprang from the bag, distributing themselves evenly across various parts of the stadium. They unfurled gracefully, enhancing the beauty of the newly transformed arena. "Not bad at all," Ludo remarked happily. He noticed that the seats behind him were more than just chairs. Each had a small rotating table on the armrest, perfect for holding fruit or other snacks. "Where is Dumbledore?" he inquired, puzzled. "Why isn't he here?" Atticus looked eastward, pondering for a moment. "I can't say for certain, Ludo, if I had to guess. He's probably just waking up and shaving his beard in the principal's private luxury bathroom." Ludo burst into cheerful laughter, but his expression shifted when he saw Atticus preparing to return to the studio. Quickly, he grabbed Atticus's sleeve, his eyes filled with a questioning look, though he hesitated to speak. "Well, Atticus, you know, this game is attracting a lot of attention. I mean, from outside," Ludo stammered. "If you're asking me to predict the tournament winner so you can bet big at the casino, Ludo," Atticus replied calmly, "then let me tell you, anyone can win. I'm warning you, Ludo, don't bring those bad habits to the Triwizard Tournament. I don't want any scandals during the event." "I appreciate your generosity, Atticus," Ludo said eagerly, "but that's a large sum of gold, and you have the chance to seize it." Atticus's eyes turned cold, and he was about to respond when a sudden commotion erupted outside the arena. He immediately recognized it as Charlie and his team escorting several fire dragons to the venue. "Don't do anything foolish, Ludo," Atticus warned before vanishing abruptly, leaving Ludo Bagman alone, stamping his feet in frustration and reluctance. 4 massive carriages landed heavily from midair. The wooden wheels, though exaggeratedly deformed, withstood the impact and safely delivered the 4 fire dragons. "How are our protagonists?" Atticus called out to Charlie, who had just jumped from the carriage. "They're sleeping soundly, Atticus," Charlie shouted back. "They'll wake in a few hours." Before giving them sleeping pills, Hagrid and his elf Dom fed them. You know, a hungry fire dragon poses a greater threat to a warrior. A large gap opened in the ground, revealing a slope leading to a faintly lit area. Charlie directed his team to carefully guide the carriages into this temporary dungeon, where the fire dragons would be housed until the game began. Another carriage arrived from the covered bridge, serving as a temporary kitchen. The house elves of Hogwarts were tasked with preparing a delicious lunch for early guests in the arena. During the game, they would also serve refreshing drinks. Though not as grand as the Quidditch finals, the arena was equally magnificent, with numerous large antennas erected in the surrounding mountains. At the base of each antenna, elves and WWN staff worked diligently. As the morning light pierced the last remnants of mist in the mountains and valleys, Atticus stood in the transformed arena. He fired a beam of blue electric light at the massive screen hanging high above. With a burst of dazzling light and shifting shadows, the black screen, a clear image finally emerged, an enclosed field with intricate terrain at its center. Over the past 6 months, all my efforts have culminated in this moment. End of this chapter. Chapter 615, Cultural Invasion in Another World. At 6 o'clock on a winter morning, the sky outside remained as dark as it had been the night before. Thanks to the early morning exercises from physical education class, Atticus Blaine didn't find it too painful to leave his warm bed at this hour. It took him just over 10 seconds to remember why he had set his alarm clock so early. After a brief moment, he quickly dressed, got out of bed, and headed to the bathroom to freshen up. His boots were spotless, his wizard's robes were neat and wrinkle-free, and even his glasses had been magically cleaned by Hermione the night before. The only flaw was his hair, which stubbornly stuck up despite his best efforts to smooth it down. Neville was already gone, but the other 3 boys were still sound asleep, having stayed up late discussing the game and pestering Atticus and Neville about the escort mission they were to undertake today. "Good morning, Atticus," Ginny greeted him at the Gryffindor table when he arrived at the Great Hall for breakfast. "Good morning, Ginny," Atticus replied, surprised to see her. He noticed that Ginny had taken the time to dress up, looking more beautiful than before. However, compared to the girl with the bright smile at the Ravenclaw table, Ginny still seemed a bit overshadowed in Atticus's eyes. "Are you the only one?" he asked. Ginny's cheeks flushed and her eyes sparkled. "A group of people just left, and I haven't finished eating yet, so I stayed here." "Well, it seems we have to speed up too," Atticus nodded awkwardly, then focused on his food. He could feel Ginny's sad gaze on him. By now, Atticus could face Ginny with a relatively calm demeanor, partly because she had matured and become more reserved. "I want you to remember the rules." By the time Atticus and Ginny hurried to the school gate, most of the students from the physical education class had already gathered. Everyone wore what appeared to be brand new wizard robes and chatted excitedly. Filch, clad in his moldy tuxedo as he did for every important occasion, was bellowing at the top of his lungs. "You represent Hogwarts. Any behavior that damages the school's image will be punished. This is Professor Blaine's order. Listen, Cubs, I've submitted an application to Professor Blaine, asking him to allow me to use some ancient methods to punish disobedient students. If you want to try it, then go ahead." Mrs. Norris, her fur thicker than usual, perched on Filch's shoulder and growled menacingly at the right moment. "This old loser is good for nothing except using chicken feathers as arrows." Fred, who was chatting with Angelina, quipped sarcastically, and Atticus chuckled at his remark. Filch dreamed of shackling the students in the castle, but everyone knew that was impossible. Even with Professor Blaine's order, Filch found he couldn't establish authority over the unruly students. Realizing this, his mood soured, and he snorted angrily before turning to unlock the school gate. As they walked through the dense forest, covered with damp fallen leaves, the surroundings remained dark. It wasn't until they ascended a rugged path to a hillside that the morning light became visible. The students were surprised to find that, right next to them, the world was beginning to awaken. Atop a hill stood a tall metal pole, resembling an antenna. "I heard Professor Flitwick mention that it's an alchemical device used to transmit game images, invented by Professor Blaine," Cho Chang said with a touch of awe. "There seems to be something up there," Neville squinted, hesitantly adding, "It looks like a house elf." "It's a goblin, Neville," Harry corrected decisively. The conversation about how Professor Blaine planned to broadcast the competition scenes at Hogwarts to the entire European wizarding world quickly gained momentum. However, some already knew the answer, like the Weasley siblings and Harry. "That's really not easy," George whispered to Harry. "We've always wanted to recreate this setup, but no matter how many times we try, we can't succeed. This isn't something that can be solved with just transfiguration and alchemy." Fred and George had been fascinated by the magical device since they sneaked into Professor Blaine's office at the start of the previous year. Harry knew they had been trying their best to replicate it, but had not succeeded. It wasn't surprising. This remarkable alchemical prop was far from the joke products Fred and George excelled at. "How's your career going?" Harry asked casually, taking a breath. At this, Fred and George became animated, ready to share their news. However, the rising sun suddenly broke free from the horizon, casting millions of golden rays that brought the dull world to life. As they stood, the students were astonished to see that the original antenna was not alone. Similar antennas dotted nearly every hill as far as the eye could see. "These crazy goblins!" exclaimed Justin Finch Fletchley of Hufflepuff in surprise. "I shudder to think how much gold this must have cost." His comment drew a contemptuous snort from Draco. Although he came from a business family and had little interest in managing the family business, his business acumen was far superior to others. The new equipment funded by the goblins was indeed valuable, but the potential profits from broadcasting the game were immense. If they could persuade Professor Blaine to transfer the technology, these devices wouldn't be a one-time investment. They were collaborating with WWN to introduce a new form of entertainment to the magical world. A little foresight would reveal the vast number of gold galleons hidden in this venture. Outside the school term, or during breaks like summer and Christmas, Hogsmeade Station was often deserted, with only a few villagers tending to the large station. Outside, the carriages used by Hogwarts to transport students were lined up neatly on the platform. These carriages had been cleaned, and a brand new red carpet stretched from the exit to the boarding point. Alongside the red carpet, bright flower baskets were placed every few steps. When Harry entered the station, he noticed flags on the two steel pillars supporting the building's main structure. They bore the Hogwarts emblem, and a huge banner stretched between the pillars, reading, "Warmly welcome people from all walks of life, from the wizarding world to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." "Whose idea was this?" Millicent asked, clicking her tongue. "It definitely can't be Dumbledore," Draco remarked, eyeing the decorated station with interest. "It can only be Professor Blaine." The sparse sunlight finally illuminated the ancient landscape. From the sky, the sound of whistles echoed among the mountains. The young wizards waiting at the station were taken aback, quickly turning their attention to the source of the sound. They stood in formation, as rehearsed, each individual with a sense of pride evident in their puffed-up chests. Today, the castle by the lake would once again become the center of attention for the European magical community and even the world's magical civilization. End of this chapter. Chapter 6-16. Hogwarts is much more presentable. To be honest, Lucius Malfoy was not particularly eager to visit Hogwarts. The school housed the infamous old man he despised most in the wizarding world. Every time he saw that smiling face, Lucius felt both physically and mentally uncomfortable. In the past, he would visit once a year, as he was a director of the Hogwarts School Board and needed to exercise his authority. However, since Dumbledore had ousted him from the board in the first half of last year, he had avoided the school, except for the time he sought help from Atticus Blaine. The thought of the school was unpleasant, yet here he was today, accompanied by his wife. It wasn't due to a sudden interest in the Triwizard Tournament or a desire to see his son. Rather, it was because of an invitation from Atticus Blaine. Among all the staff at Hogwarts, Blaine was the only one Lucius was inclined to meet. When he received the invitation, Lucius was genuinely surprised. He never imagined Blaine would fawn over the Malfoy family like others. If anyone needed to curry favor, it was Lucius himself. He understood well the art of mutual exploitation. Their shared interest was the Dark Lord. Lucius had come to realize that the Dark Lord's true aim was not to restore the glory of the pureblood families, but to rule as a tyrant, making everyone his slave. Lucius wanted to escape, but lacked the courage. He knew better than anyone the Dark Lord's methods for dealing with traitors, having often been the one to carry them out. Blaine, on the other hand, did not hide his intention to oppose the Dark Lord. He understood the difficulty of the task, and perhaps saw some value in the Malfoy family, an opportunity for himself. Lucius found himself unable to refuse either side, so he hedged his bets, a dangerous game, but one the Malfoys excelled at. "Honey?" Narcissa opened the sliding door of the compartment and entered. She found her husband lost in thought, staring at the scenery passing by the window, oblivious to her arrival. "Well," Lucius responded, turning to look at his wife seated opposite him. "Who did you meet?" "Mrs. Fudge," Narcissa replied. "Fudge didn't come, but he reserved a place for his wife. We've arranged to go shopping in Paris next week." Lucius mumbled something inaudible, and after a moment's hesitation, Narcissa asked, "There are quite a few interesting people on this train, dear. Do you think we're making the right choice?" As a business tycoon, Lucius understood the importance of networking. In the past, he would never have missed such an opportunity, but today he shook his head at his wife's suggestion. He was not in a good mood. He could have returned to Hogwarts as a master, but now he was only there by invitation. Lucius's foul mood persisted until he disembarked from the Hogwarts train. He immediately noticed how different the remote station looked. He wasn't the only one surprised. Everyone familiar with the place marveled at the new appearance of Hogsmeade Station. They couldn't ignore the welcoming banners and flower baskets, but Lucius's attention was elsewhere. After leaving the station, he soon discovered that Hogwarts itself had undergone a transformation. The greeters had been sent, and they were all young wizards. This left Lucius feeling somewhat slighted. To him, it signified a lack of respect. His mood soured further when he noticed his son, Draco, among the young wizards. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. Narcissa, too, noticed their son standing tall among the flower baskets, exuding a newfound sense of competence that was markedly different from how she remembered him. "Draco!" Lucius and Narcissa hurried over to their son. Narcissa couldn't hide her delight at seeing Draco looking so confident. "Why are you here?" "I'm on a mission, Mom," Draco replied tersely, his gaze fixed straight ahead, his words forced through clenched teeth. Lucius shifted his attention from the scarred boy nearby and focused on Draco's statement. "Is this all arranged by Blaine?" he asked, his eyelid twitching slightly. Before Draco could respond, Mrs. Fudge and Miss Bones strolled past the Malfoys. Mrs. Fudge surveyed the scene with interest, her voice filled with nostalgia. "Oh my, I haven't been here in ages. Professor Dumbledore actually arranged a carriage. This is wonderful. I remember when we had to walk, and if we were lucky, the villagers of Hogsmeade would give us a ride." "Dumbledore has always been considerate," Miss Bones replied with a slight smile. "But I doubt these arrangements were his doing." The St. Mungo's medical team hurriedly boarded a carriage, followed by the young wizards who were to escort them to Hogwarts. As the carriage departed, the old goblin, Bana, watched the scene unfold. His gaze shifted to the antenna set up on the distant mountain, a hint of amusement in his cloudy eyes. "Dad, how did we get the invitation?" A beautiful young woman in her 20s asked, blinking curiously at the middle-aged wizard beside her. The admiration in her eyes brightened Cacusfolli's face. He coughed theatrically, straightened his back, and replied with a touch of pride. "Don't forget, Beatrice, we are the Foley family, one of the 28 sacred families. Besides, I have a rather good personal relationship with Mr. Blaine." With that, the father and daughter quickly boarded the carriage arranged by the school. Harry watched them disappear from view, frowning slightly. The man seemed oddly familiar to him. "Grandpa, can I see Mr. Blaine later?" Alger tugged on his grandfather's sleeve, his voice brimming with excitement. "Do you think he'll remember saving me?" "Oh, I think so, Alger," Vipdragon replied gently, smiling at his grandson. Yet, when he looked up at the looming black castle in the distance, his expression grew complicated. The carriages slowly departed Hogsmeade Station, protected by the young wizards. Narcissa opened the curtains and watched her son, who was walking alongside the carriage. Her eyes filled with concern. "Come up, Draco. Let Greengrass and the 2 Parkinson girls ride as well. You don't have to walk to school, do you?" "That's just silly. I'm on an escort mission, Mom. I can't become a laughingstock," Draco insisted, his eyes scanning the brightening forest with vigilance. Suddenly, a nearby bush rustled unnaturally. Draco's eyes sharpened, and with a swift flick of his wand, a black poisonous python leaped out, capturing a trembling fox in its jaws. "Oh!" Draco sighed in disappointment, but quickly called out to Astoria on the other side of the carriage, who was ready to assist. "Danger cleared." The Malfoy couple observed the scene from the carriage, exchanging a knowing glance. They could see the surprise in each other's eyes. Draco's recent maneuver wasn't particularly complex, yet the decisiveness and sharpness it displayed were astonishing, even for seasoned elites like them who had faced numerous life-and-death crises on the battlefield. Narcissa no longer attempted to persuade Draco to get into the car. Instead, she gazed at the castle, which was gradually becoming visible through the rows of trees, her voice tinged with mixed emotions. "Hogwarts is finally looking a little more presentable, isn't it, my dear?" "What do you intend to do, Atticus Blaine?" Lucius Malfoy was not as pleased as he had anticipated. He observed his son with a solemn expression through the curtain, his heart heavy with worry. "Are we destined to face each other on the battlefield one day, Draco?" End of chapter. Chapter 617, The Arena. The arena for the Triwizard Tournament, while not as grand or expansive as this summer's Quidditch final, still held its own charm. The Quidditch final, orchestrated by the Ministry of Magic, had pooled nearly all the resources of the British wizarding world to create a spectacle. In contrast, the Triwizard Tournament's arena was largely the result of Atticus Blaine's efforts, who had painstakingly brought it to its current state. Despite the differences in scale, the audience's enthusiasm and the event's significance were not diminished. Although no Minister of Magic from any country attended the tournament, the event was graced by notable figures to underscore its importance. Ludo Bagman and Barty Crouch served as referees, while Amelia Bones, the director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and Mrs. Fudge were present to support Hogwarts. Additionally, Mr. Gerson Barna, the president of Gringotts World Bank and a goblin leader who had not been seen in public for nearly half a century, attended to support his personal friend, Atticus Blaine. The event also saw the presence of Albus Dumbledore, Vip Dregern, and Atticus Blaine, who held the title of Vice Chairman of the Wizards Federation. Carcus Foley, a significant figure in the British magical underground and the shadow world of European magic, was also in attendance. Lucius Malfoy, observing the interactions between Foley and Blaine, felt a surge of hatred. He finally understood how his grand display at the Quidditch World Cup, intended to please the returning Dark Lord, had been uncovered by Blaine. Despite his animosity, Lucius couldn't help but be impressed by the gathering of influential figures at Hogwarts for the Triwizard Tournament. Even Cornelius Fudge lacked the influence to assemble such a crowd. The network of connections Atticus Blaine had quietly built was astonishing, though Lucius acknowledged that Albus Dumbledore's influence was also a significant factor. As Lucius watched Dumbledore and Blaine, two figures of different generations yet equally commanding, his resolve hardened. The weather was clear, with no clouds in sight, a fortunate turn given Blaine's mischievous nature. If the weather had not cooperated, Blaine might have taken to the skies to disperse any rain clouds with magic. Despite the late November chill, Blaine had ensured the comfort of the spectators. The cold winds that swept across the desolate mountains were tempered to be gentle and warm within the stadium. The tournament was scheduled for the afternoon, and it was impractical for guests to return to the Great Hall of Hogwarts for lunch. While no one attended solely for the food, it was important that their appreciation for Hogwarts wasn't marred by hunger. At mealtime, young wizards ran along the aisles, informing spectators in clear, confident tones that menus were hidden in the armrests of their seats and on the small tables. By simply reading aloud their desired dishes, the Hogwarts kitchen would promptly deliver the food, ensuring everyone could enjoy the event in comfort. "Quite an interesting idea, isn't it, Barty?" Ludo remarked, seemingly having forgotten the unsuccessful negotiation with Atticus Blaine earlier that morning. He smiled at Barty, who still appeared somewhat lethargic. "We could certainly draw inspiration from this for the next big event the Ministry of Magic hosts. Let me think." The referee's seating area was significantly more spacious than the spectator seats, allowing for several long tables to be placed in front of them. Ludo called out experimentally, How about a steak? With a soft crackling sound, a sizzling, juicy pan-fried steak materialized on the table before him. Watch your appetite, Ludo, Atticus said with a grin. I forgot to include a bathroom when designing this building, so if your stomach starts acting up, you'll have to dash outside to find relief. The surrounding crowd chuckled good-naturedly, and Goblin Bana glanced at the embarrassed Ludo with amusement twinkling in his eyes. Mr. B. Lane. A goblin hurriedly emerged from a small room behind the referee's bench. Its gaze lingered momentarily on the backs of Blaine and Bana before it approached Mr. Bana and whispered something. The viewing equipment we've installed in each arena has been debugged. Would you like to? Oh, certainly, Atticus replied with a smile. Those nearby, including Dumbledore, anticipated his next move and turned their attention to the large viewing screen with interest. Atticus rose from his seat and made his way to the studio. After a slight tremor, brilliant blue lights began to flicker across the previously dark screen. Under the watchful eyes of hundreds, the lights flashed faster and faster until, with a collective gasp from the audience, the intricate terrain of the competition venue appeared on the screen. That's incredible, Atticus, Amelia praised, having been briefed beforehand. Your invention is remarkably practical. If it could be widely implemented. She paused, realizing the need for discretion in such a setting. The arena buzzed with admiration and surprise, particularly in the section reserved for pure-blood wizard families. These influential figures, who controlled key industries in the magical world, recognized the vast potential of this invention. Even Lucius Malfoy, deep in thought, gazed at the clear projection with newfound interest. Not everyone, however, was impressed by the debut of this surveillance technology. Below the arena, Moody, who was patrolling the area, caught sight of his own reflection on the corner of the big screen, along with the surveillance mirrors hovering in midair. A flicker of panic crossed his face. He turned to look at Atticus Blaine, who was conversing and laughing with various dignitaries on the high platform, his intact blue eye betraying his unease. Just then, the ground trembled slightly, and amidst the growing hum, the cheers of young wizards became increasingly audible. "Oh, my goodness, they're already here," Atticus exclaimed with mild surprise. "Come on, Ludo, Barty, the warriors are nearly here, and we must witness them choose their opponents." End of this chapter. Chapter 618. Atticus Blaine, Ludo, and Barty waited patiently on the transfer platform. The arena was bustling with young wizards, their excitement palpable as they rushed in, occupying every available space. The physical education students, tasked with maintaining order, shouted above the din, doing their utmost to guide the eager spectators to their seats. The children were thrilled by the complex terrain at the center of the arena and the large game screen suspended high above, which displayed the entire field. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and the already lively atmosphere reached a fever pitch, as if a single spark could ignite the entire arena into a chorus of cheers. "I bet people will remember this game, Atticus," Ludo exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement as he observed the animated faces around him. "Hurry up, Atticus. Keep an eye on the time," Barty Crouch urged impatiently. "How's it going, Alastor? Is everything okay?" Atticus asked as the three of them descended to the circular passage at the bottom of the arena. There, they found Moody, the security guard, standing by the guardrail. He was staring blankly at the flickering display screen and the dozens of winged panoramic telescopes hovering in the air, seemingly oblivious to their presence. This was unusual. As they passed by Moody, Atticus suddenly stopped. He turned to look at Moody and asked calmly, "What?" Moody looked back, startled. When he realized it was Atticus, he instinctively averted his magical eye. He hesitated for a few seconds before responding. "Oh, everything is fine, Atticus. Just thinking about your surveillance. I need to check on Charlie Weasley. There can't be any trouble now." Atticus watched as Moody quickly walked into the passage leading to the temporary detention area for the fire dragon. A strange, almost imperceptible light flickered in his purple eyes. Barty began to urge him again, so Atticus resumed walking, leading them to a tent outside the stadium that connected to the safe passage inside. He opened the curtain, and the three of them entered one after another. The tent, made of thick felt, was warm and inviting. Inside, a few officials from the Department of Magical Sports were waiting, ready to guide the warriors into the arena. The protagonists of the Triwizard Tournament, the three warriors, were seated on one side of the tent, resting. Professor McGonagall was there as well, offering comfort to Hermione. In recent days, Atticus had been so preoccupied with various tasks that he hadn't had time to consider the mental states of these young competitors. Fleur was the first to catch his eye. As soon as he entered, her gaze was fixed on him. However, her eyes soon lost their enchanting allure, replaced by a look of fear. Atticus noticed that the pink hue that usually adorned Fleur's pale skin was absent, leaving her as white as snow. Crumb appeared more composed. He glanced at Atticus before lowering his head, staring at his hands with a somber expression. His fingertips trembled slightly. Cedric seemed eager to greet Atticus, but when he tried to stand, he faltered, his arms unable to support him. Embarrassed, he remained seated. The youngest warrior, Hermione, sat with her mouth slightly open, confusion clouding her eyes. When she saw Professor Blaine enter, her vacant gaze turned pleading. She clutched Professor McGonagall's hand tightly, seeking reassurance. Professor McGonagall, in turn, offered her silent support, her presence a comforting anchor in the storm of emotions swirling around them. Atticus Blaine had been trying to comfort her, but it seemed she hadn't heard a word. The air was thick with tension, especially when the warriors noticed that Professor Blaine and two officials from the British Ministry of Magic had entered the room. The tension reached its peak, and Atticus worried that the warriors might break down at any moment. "Is it time already, Atticus?" Professor McGonagall's voice trembled, and she appeared even more anxious than Hermione. Atticus glanced at the four warriors, noting with satisfaction that they had donned the competition uniforms he had provided, as per the regulations. He responded to Professor McGonagall's inquiry with a reassuring smile. "We have to wait a little longer." Turning to face Ludo and Barty, Atticus asked, "So, Ludo, Barty, which one of you will take the lead?" "This is your home turf, Atticus. You should go ahead," Ludo replied cheerfully. Atticus looked to Barty Crouch for confirmation, and Barty nodded listlessly. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, please gather around," Atticus called to the warriors. A staff member promptly handed him a purple silk bag, sealed with magic. The warriors' eyes were fixed on the bag in Professor Blaine's hand, their expressions a mix of panic, reluctance, and dread. "Relax, everyone. Show your courage, strength, and wisdom. I assure you, no one will meet a tragic end here today," Atticus said with a touch of humor. Ludo laughed heartily, clutching his belly, but the warriors remained tense, and Professor McGonagall shot him a stern glare. Atticus coughed awkwardly, then retrieved his wand from his sleeve to break the seal on the silk bag, holding the bag's mouth closed with his other hand. "Here's the deal," he began, aware of the growing calls from the arena outside. He needed to hurry. Smiling at the warriors, he explained, "Inside this bag are several models of creatures you'll need to contend with. Your task is to retrieve a golden egg from them. The golden egg is distinct from the others, so you'll recognize it immediately. Any questions?" Hermione's mind, though foggy, latched onto the realization that they would be retrieving the egg from a dragon. Before her thoughts could scatter again, Professor Blaine handed her the daunting purple bag. "I trust no one objects to giving our youngest warrior the first choice. Go ahead, Miss Granger. Your destiny is in your hands," he encouraged. Hermione's lips were parched, feeling like two pieces of bark when they touched. She repeated the few words she had practiced over the past days in her mind. It wasn't until Professor Blaine prompted her again that she snapped back to reality. All eyes were on her, and her heart pounded wildly in her chest, causing a sharp pain. Resigned, Hermione reached into the bag. As Atticus watched Hermione's wrist disappear into the bag, a faint, crisp sound came from outside the tent. It was easily lost in the howling wind, yet distinct. Simultaneously, a tiny flash of light flickered inside the bag, unseen by anyone, and one of the four small models slipped into Hermione's waiting hand. Hermione instinctively withdrew her hand, revealing her choice to everyone. "Oh, it's a Chinese fireball. You're number one," Ludo announced happily, but then he paused, casting a suspicious glance at Atticus. "In order to prevent any leaks, I changed the order," Atticus Blaine said, his calm gaze shifting away from the corner of the tent where a small, shadowy figure had just darted out of sight. "Is it?" Ludo murmured to himself, his voice barely audible. A moment later, understanding dawned on his face, and the suspicion in his eyes vanished as he looked at Atticus. His attention then turned to Hermione, whose cheeks were flushed with excitement, her eyes shining brightly. End of this chapter. Chapter 619, The Game Begins. Hermione was followed by Fleur, who drew the number 2 Welsh Green Dragon. Fleur breathed a sigh of relief, knowing she wouldn't be the first to face the challenge. However, the luck of the two men was not particularly favorable. Krum drew number 3 and had to confront the most vicious Hungarian horntail, while Cedric was tasked with handling the Swedish short snout and was the first to compete. 2 staff members quickly emerged with the lottery results. One was to inform the dragon trainers of the order, while the other was to deliver the results to the studio. All right, you have a few minutes to prepare. Once you hear the whistle, follow the staff's guidance and enter through the outer passage. Do you understand? The warriors nodded stiffly, indicating their understanding. Atticus Blaine had nothing more to explain. The rest depended on their own preparations. As he was about to leave, Fleur suddenly rushed out from the group of warriors, her clear blue eyes sparkling with concern. What if those dragons go crazy? She asked, her voice almost breathless. Professor Dumbledore and I will manage the situation to prevent any tragedy, Miss Delacour. But you must all understand that the Triwizard Tournament is fraught with danger, and injuries are inevitable. Ultimately, you must rely on yourselves to overcome these challenges, Atticus reminded them, not wanting the warriors to be overly optimistic. With that, Atticus, Ludo, and Barty exited the tent and ascended the platform surrounding the arena. Atticus paused. Ludo, Barty, you go ahead. I need to speak with Charlie Weasley. I'm concerned about the dragon's entrance. He turned and walked toward the passage leading outside the arena. Barty proceeded without hesitation, but Ludo lingered, watching Atticus's retreating figure with a satisfied smile. The lineup was as follows. Cedric Diggory, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Swedish Short Snout, Fleur Delacour, Boken's Academy of Magic, Welsh Green Dragon, Victor Krum, Durmstrang Institute, Hungarian Horntail, Hermione Granger, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Chinese Fireball. Dragons! It's dragons! This is incredible! How can they do this? The competition's events were top secret. Neither the invited guests nor the Hogwarts students knew what the warriors would face. When the game screen displayed the lineup, the stadium fell silent for a moment before erupting into a thunderous roar that swept through the venue. In the Gryffindor section, Seamus shouted at the top of his lungs, his face flushed with excitement. He stood up, knocking over his pumpkin juice, and yelled at the big screen with all his might. The other students reacted similarly, roaring with excitement. However, not everyone shared the enthusiasm. Neville, who hadn't attended the World Cup over the summer, was enjoying the atmosphere with his classmates. But when he saw the words on the big screen, he froze as if struck by lightning. Ron, drenched in pumpkin juice, reacted even more intensely. He stared at the screen in disbelief before suddenly leaping up. "Get out of the way," he shouted, his voice lost in the cacophony. "Move, Colin. I need to get out and see what's happening." Ron shouted, pushing his way through the throng of students. The rumors were true. The competition team had indeed tasked the warriors with confronting a fire dragon. Despite his urgency, the crowd was too engrossed in the spectacle to notice or make way for him. Feeling a surge of desperation, Ron caught sight of Harry, who was staring at the large screen with a similarly grim expression. "Harry," Ron called out, "did you hear? How's Hermione? Has the Ministry of Magic lost their minds, letting her face a fire dragon?" Professor Atticus Blaine had instructed the physical education students to maintain order during the event. With so many students and prominent figures from the wizarding world present, they needed to be vigilant against any unruly behavior. Yet, when Hermione's name appeared on the screen, Harry couldn't help but look worried. Amidst the roaring crowd, Harry faintly heard someone calling his name. He scanned the area and noticed a shadowy figure on the platform below, beckoning him. His heart skipped a beat. After rubbing his eyes to ensure he wasn't imagining things, he saw the figure more clearly, a large black dog. Excitement welled up within him, and he momentarily forgot the chaos around him as he rushed down the steps. The black dog, Having successfully caught Harry's attention, wagged its tail, and trotted out of the arena. It paused outside, waiting for Harry to catch up. "Sirius," Harry panted, shivering from the sudden drop in temperature as he reached the dog, which was nearly his size. "Why are you here, and why are you using your animagus form?" In a blur of light and shadow, the dog transformed, revealing Sirius with a mischievous grin. "I'm here to watch the game, of course," Sirius said, glancing cautiously over Harry's shoulder. Fudge has been swamped with leave requests lately. Everyone wants to head to Diagon Alley to watch the game. The goblins have set up a venue there, charging 20 galleons for entry. With so many requests, Fudge started tossing them into the trash. I figured it was better to be here in person, so I told Scrimgeour I was on a mission and snuck over. I can't exactly show my face around Ms. Bones, Barty, or Ludo, though, or I'd be in trouble. Sirius's excitement was infectious, and Harry couldn't help but smile. "The Warriors are really going to face the Fire Dragon, aren't they?" Sirius asked, leaning against a steel pillar. "Is Hermione ready?" "I'm not sure," Harry replied earnestly. "Hagrid tipped us off, so we prepared as best we could, but there's always a chance something could go wrong. Professor Blaine had me on duty at Hogsmeade Station early this morning, so I haven't seen Hermione. Did you spot her when you arrived?" "I just saw a house elf running over there in a panic," Sirius remarked thoughtfully. "Perhaps it's over in that direction. We should go and take a look." Before Harry could respond, an earth-shattering roar erupted from the arena. Ludo Bagman's enthusiastic voice boomed across the stands. "Ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've all been waiting for has finally arrived. Let's give a rousing cheer for Cedric Diggory of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." End of this chapter. Chapter 620, Cedric and the Dragon. "Oh, that's Charlie!" exclaimed the crowd as Charlie Weasley and his friends led the Swedish short snout onto the stage. The dragon, towering several stories high with its magnificent silver-blue scales, immediately drew gasps from the audience. The sight of the fierce-looking fire dragon was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Amidst the buzz of conversation, Fred shouted in frustration. He already knew the first task was the fire dragon, but he didn't tell us. "I hope he can last 10 minutes, George added enthusiastically, craning his neck for a better view. "But his handsome face will definitely take a hit, right?" With only a few minutes left before the dragon regained consciousness, Charlie meticulously checked the chain around the Swedish short snout's neck. Satisfied that everything was secure, he deftly placed the golden egg among the real dragon eggs and quickly signaled his companions to retreat. This scene played out on the large screen, drawing soft laughter from the audience who found the dragon tamer's hasty escape amusing. For safety, the arena's perimeter was fortified with thick blue stone slabs, and the viewing platform was elevated. Spectators found it more convenient to watch the action through the magical surveillance cameras than to strain their necks looking down. On the competition's big screen, the Swedish short snout's eyes gradually cleared. As it stood, it snorted, releasing a burst of blue flames that ignited a rock over 10 feet away. Under the intense heat, the rock softened like wax, and molten stone dripped to the ground. The studio provided a close-up of the rock, giving those unfamiliar with fire dragons a visceral sense of their power. "Don't worry, Pomona. He'll be fine. We all know how talented that boy is," Professor McGonagall reassured Professor Sprout, whose shoulders trembled with fear. However, McGonagall's own voice betrayed her anxiety. The Swedish dragon, realizing it was surrounded by thousands of humans, flapped its wings furiously, raising clouds of smoke and dust. It attempted to flee, but the chain around its neck held firm. Accepting its confinement, the dragon exhaled thick smoke from its nostrils and folded its wings protectively over itself and the eggs at its feet. If not for Bagman's announcement, the crowd might have missed the arrival of the first champion. "Let's give a warm cheer for Mr. Cedric Diggory of Hogwarts, shall we? I hope he completes the task brilliantly." Bagman's voice redirected attention from the dragon to Cedric, and the audience eagerly searched for him on the expansive, rocky arena. Compared to the dragon, Cedric was almost invisible, appearing as small as a matchstick from the elevated stands. Surveillance cameras zoomed in, finally revealing Cedric's expression, which many found intriguing. The fire dragon was positioned beneath a massive rock formation at the arena's center, the highest point on the field. Cedric stood at the base of the gentle slope, wand clenched tightly in his hand, as still as a statue. He gazed at the dragon beneath the boulder, the largest and most terrifying creature he had ever encountered. From a distance of more than 1,000 feet, Atticus Blaine could feel the fiery breath of the dragon brushing against his cheek. It was easy to imagine that a single misstep could lead to the dragon tearing him to shreds. As the game commenced, the stadium fell into a hushed silence. All eyes were on Cedric, standing there with anticipation for his performance. Cedric felt a relentless buzzing in his head, making it difficult to think clearly or calm his nerves. He had only learned about the challenge he faced 4 days prior, and since then he had been consumed by doubt and fear, leaving little time to strategize on how to confront the crisis. In the passageway, Cho Chang, tasked with maintaining order, couldn't help but cover her eyes in worry. In a temporary structure near Diagon Alley, Atticus and his wife clutched each other's hands tightly, their eyes filled with concern. Seems we need to give Mr. Diggory some time to adjust. Bagman's voice echoed through the arena. His tone was light-hearted, but as soon as he finished speaking, Cedric, who had been frozen for several minutes, finally began to move. His movements were awkward, like a puppet struggling up a steep slope, but at least he remembered to conceal himself. He crouched low, avoiding the rocks ahead, and stumbled forward. The arena remained silent, with no one mocking Cedric's clumsy demeanor. He had at least conquered his inner fear and was ready to take action. Well, Mr. Diggory seems to have overcome his mental obstacles and is trying to get closer to the fire dragon, Bagman exclaimed with excitement. Let's see what Mr. Diggory will do next. The distance of over 1,000 feet was akin to the space needed to dodge large obstacles in gym class. Cedric had mastered avoiding those, but approaching the fire dragon was far more daunting. By the time he was within 200 feet of the dragon, he was drenched in sweat. He crouched behind a rock, cautiously peeking out to assess the situation. He spotted the golden dragon egg nestled among the regular ones and noticed a chain around the dragon's neck. This was both reassuring and troubling. The chain limited the dragon's movement, offering some safety, but it also meant the dragon wouldn't stray far from its eggs, forcing Cedric to get dangerously close. Cedric advanced cautiously, aware that the closer he got, the fewer rocks there were to shield him. He had to seize the moment when the Swedish Brachyrhinosaurus looked away to inch closer. 200 feet, 150 feet, 100 feet. At this range, Cedric could feel the dragon's immense power and see its menacing fangs. Now it's time to make your move, Mr. Diggory, Bagman announced, seizing the moment. Cedric halted 60 feet from the Swedish Brachyrhinosaurus, knowing there were no more large rocks to hide behind. Despite the relatively small amount of physical exertion, Cedric was already sweating and breathing heavily. He leaned against the rock, quietly surveying his surroundings. In situations like this, unless you possess overwhelming strength, never forget to. The surrounding environment was familiar to Atticus Blaine, thanks to Professor Braine's teachings. The terrain at the top of the slope was relatively straightforward. Aside from a massive rock formation jutting from the ground, the other 3 sides were covered in loess, scattered with small rocks. To facilitate the warrior's approach to the fire dragon, the slope on this side was gentler, while the opposite slope was much steeper. Atticus knew he had only one chance. As a warrior, Cedric understood that if he waited until the fire dragon realized someone was attempting to steal its eggs, he would lose his opportunity. He was so focused on judging the distance that he forgot he was being watched by thousands of wizards. Time seemed to stand still in the arena as everyone awaited Cedric's move. Perhaps influenced by a strange scent, the Swedish Brachyrhinosaurus began to look around, its agitation growing. Thick smoke, reeking of sulfur, billowed from its nostrils. Under the spotlight, Cedric finally sprang into action. His wand emerged from behind the rock, aimed at a stone more than 10 feet away. A breeze, conjured from thin air, swept over the rock, causing it to undergo a complex transformation. In the end, a Newfoundland hound appeared on the game screen. End of this chapter.